Bro's the strongest general of the humans army, but at the same time, he's also the strongest general of the demons. Bro's a double agent, cause even I don't know who he's actually loyal to, since he's playing some Megamind 4D chess moves, messing with every side of the war, while having a mental disability that makes him go from Naruto innocent boy first season to Guts first page wrecking and dismembering demons and humans, while laughing at their agony, while also having honey on his smoothie-ass baby face of his, since this red-haired thick demon girl and her pink friend of hers are into him as a demon general, while in the human kingdom the Yandere psycho princess is also doing her best to get some backshots while he's out there distributing backstabs freely on every enemy in sight. So yeah, boy is so scary and brutal that everyone's greatest fear in life is having him as an enemy. Now without further ado, let's get it. Like in any world, we've got demons and warriors who fight for the empire. Among the demons, there's the king, the undisputed leader of everything. The warriors get support from the empire with the sole purpose of defeating him, and the demon king exists with the sole purpose of stopping the warriors. Explosions everywhere, and one of the warriors shouts that he's going to attack from behind. But of course, the demon king also has those who serve him with absolute loyalty. A pink-haired girl shows up, landing a kick and saying she'll take care of the weaker ones. Right away, the warriors recognize them as the commanders. You can already see the fierce redhead on the right, and in total there are 12 of them, all led by the Demon King's most powerful ally. They charge forward, and the blue-haired guy swings his sword, slashing into the warriors. The story says that there were warriors who were considered invincible, but that so-called invincible warrior met his end at the hands of the commander of the Zeroth group, known as Demon Arut. He was the king's hidden trump card and his most precious talent. Then, out of nowhere, a resignation letter drops onto the table, and the king asks what's going on. The white-haired kid immediately says he's leaving. The king's pen bursts apart, and he demands to know what this is about. Papers fly everywhere, hitting the kid in the face, and the king wants to know how he dares turn his back on him. Suddenly, the king falls to his knees, clinging to his leg, begging him not to run away like that. He says he can't abandon him. Why is he doing this? The boy doesn't seem like he wants to talk much, but the king insists on knowing why. Doesn't he like the castle? Did someone disrespect him? Did they mistreat him? Was it prejudice because he's human? The king says he cannot accept that. Arut, even if he's human, is the most powerful person he has. His powers surpass anyone else's to the point that all the others could only feel envy. He was the strongest card, one nobody dared to challenge. Dion replies that nobody did anything wrong, and the king presses him to explain why then. If he doesn't say it, Dion interrupts and asks if the king intends to kill him. The king flinches in shock and says never. He has many subordinates, but he would never kill the boy. He shakes him, demanding to know if it's because he hasn't been sent to the battlefield. Dion is about to say something, but suddenly blood drips to the ground. His nose is bleeding. Immediately, the king panics, shouting for the doctors. Sometime later, they're examining his body. A girl applies healing magic, and the king wants to know his condition. A doctor named Ben says that everyone already knows he's suffering because of the battles he fought, and his body can't handle it anymore. But the king cuts him off, saying he didn't summon him there to repeat what he already knows. They better find a way to fix him quickly, or else he knows what will happen if they fail. Ben says he understands, and the Demon King orders the boy to return and focus on recovering. So they grab Dion's arm and carry him back through the kingdom, laying him on a stretcher while people around whisper different things. Some say the general is on the verge of dying, others say he once blocked the explosion of a warrior, and even that he might be as strong as the king himself. Everyone thought it was a blessing to have him there, but the protagonist only thinks he's screwed. All they wanted was a peaceful, retired life, yet every time new stories get cooked up about him. They believe he killed a warrior, that he's powerful. But to him, all of this should be some kind of joke. The doctors bow, tell him to rest, and leave. Meanwhile, Demon Arut, or Dion Hard, keeps thinking that he isn't nearly as talented as people imagine. A girl comes to collect the medicine cup. He sets it on the tray, but she stumbles a little and he tells her she can leave. She walks out all giddy, saying his hand touched hers. But he's left thinking this woman must actually despise him, feeling disgusted just because she touched a human's hand. The only one he's certain strangely cares for him is the Demon King, always telling others to bring him food and ordering everyone to take care of him. But even that goes too far sometimes. He's a human in the demon realm, born with a weak body. At any moment he could collapse from just a bit of stress. Yet because of a series of events, everyone believes he's the strongest. He even ended up becoming the commander of the strongest group of demons. Luckily, lately his health hasn't been great, so he can use that as an excuse not to fight. But he knows the moment they discover his body is fragile, they'll tear him apart. He stands up in alarm, saying he can't stay in this castle for too long. None of these demons have a heart. He needs to find somewhere he can live in safety and peace. At that moment, someone named Ed walks into the room, calling out to him. The protagonist asks if he just got back from the human realm, and Ed says yes, and that he brought him this reflection mirror to play with. This guy is one of the few demons he feels comfortable around, always bringing him little things from the human world. But Ed is worried. He heard that he fainted and wants to know what's needed for him to recover. The protagonist thinks to himself that it's just another reincarnation and blames himself for everything in the end. Ed, however, tells him no, It's thanks to him facing that warrior that all the demons are still alive. The protagonist, however, seems to be saying that's not the case. I just want to know what kind of misunderstanding this was that happened here, or if he's just pretending like he really did those things but now insists he didn't. And then it says he's going to torture every human until he finds a treatment method. That's when the protagonist realizes, right? In the end, they're all demons after all. His friend tells him to rest and waves goodbye, while he's left thinking at least that's the only person who genuinely cares about him. The king also seemed to care, always trying to keep him safe. He just hopes the king doesn't misinterpret the situation and do something stupid. Back with the king, he's staring at the boy's resignation letter, wondering what that kid was thinking. It's impossible to read his expression. He never has one. Still, it's undeniable that he's been like this since the very moment they met. The king recalls the first time he saw him after he had defeated that warrior. The demons were saying he had finished off a human to stop his self-detonation. Right then, the king saw him as an interesting gift from the empire and asked for his name. He was amazed by the boy's loyalty, throwing himself into the battlefield like that, and couldn't even understand why they sent him to such a dangerous place. Once he learned his name, the king thought that if he had such a strong person as an ally, he would never waste him on a meaningless death, so he offered him a position in the army. The king knows he's been protecting the boy well, but he also can't keep sending him on nothing but dangerous missions. At that moment, he glances at one of the sheets of paper, and it looks like he gets an idea. Right away, he orders all the commanders to be summoned, saying they had an important meeting, while thinking this would make the boy happy. But meanwhile, the boy is trembling in bed. Suddenly, he storms out of the room in pure anger. The Dan King is calling for him just as he was resting. The bastard who put him in this room now pulling something like this out of nowhere. Worst of all, it's a commander's meeting, meaning every single powerhouse in the castle is going to be there, which only makes it worse for him. It's practically like walking straight into a death trap. He knows he doesn't stand a chance against anyone there, so the only strategy is not to provoke. A blonde demon girl there says she's never actually seen the human who lives in the castle. Her friend beside her says she missed the amazing moment when he killed the warrior, then turned and said, "My name is Demon Arut." They all misunderstood his name completely, and the girl comments that she's never heard of a demon with such an evil-sounding name. It really fits. The protagonist is standing off to the side, thinking these idiots got it wrong. His name is Dion Hart. Then his friend quickly covers her mouth and tells her to let him through, otherwise both of them will die. While the protagonist is thinking he himself might die any second because his body is completely fragile. He can't understand how these misunderstandings keep spreading like wildfire. But at the same time, he can't let anyone discover he's weak or he'll be expelled and killed. He has to keep up the confident act, so he heads toward the door. The soldiers posted there are chatting cheerfully, but the moment they notice him, they freeze in shock and immediately greet the commander, only to order that the door be opened. And then the commander of Zeroth is announced. The Demon King says that finally, he's arrived. The protagonist just stares, but inside he's completely lost. On the left is the demon Jakar, who tells him to sit beside the king. On the right, the blue-haired one, Isilde, thinks the boy looks weak, but says it would be amazing to fight against the strongest one in this place. The bulky, bald guy on the right, Belleton, says the boy is way too strong but arrogant for showing up late. Right then, the fiery, red-haired woman, Adelia, smacks him and tells him to show some respect because the commander must have his reasons. And meanwhile, Lilunel is thinking that bald fool ought to learn to show more respect to the commander. The protagonist, however, sits down, wanting to know why everyone is gathered there. It's so uncomfortable that he already wants to go back to his room. The king asks how he's feeling, and he answers that he's fine, just apologizes for being a little late. Then a demon steps up beside him and asks if he should serve him a drink. He doesn't say anything out loud, but inside he's celebrating. That's because at these meetings, they always bring out the rarest wine in the whole region, and it's one of the few reasons he even likes being there. But then he notices that this time isn't wine. It's grape juice. He's a little confused while, for some reason, the demons are all hesitating. He bangs on the table and asks why everyone else got wine while he didn't. He thinks he's being discriminated against because he's human. That's when the king says it was by his orders. Right away, Dion panics, thinking maybe the king found out he's worthless and doesn't even want to waste alcohol on him. He's already imagining himself sentenced to death. But then the king explains that this meeting is actually about him. Immediately, he orders Belleton to explain everything in detail. Belleton reports that the 12th unit has been holding the line so far, but they urgently need backup. Part of the area had been evacuated, but the rest were stuck behind the wall, and they needed to be rescued before the worst happened. Everyone at the table starts whispering in confusion, wondering how it all came to this. Even Dion is surprised. Demonic creatures are basically failures created by the Demon King. They lose control and start running wild, doing whatever they want, but he can't figure out what any of that has to do with him. After all, the meeting is supposedly about him. Then Belleton explains that the war is escalating and more monsters keep appearing, which is already a mystery. The king says the reason they've been piling up is obvious. Since the hero was killed, who else would be left to slay the monsters? Dion realizes instantly that, in theory, they see him as the one responsible, since they believe he's the one who did it. Could they really be planning to pin it all on him? But he glares at the Demon King too. After all, that bastard also wanted the hero dead. The Demon King meets his gaze and seems to see something in his eyes. Then he laughs and declares that the Zeroth group will provide the backup. At that, the protagonist is thrown off, and the king adds that he can go out there, calm things down, and cut down a few creatures. Off to the side, Beliton is seething with envy, since the king is entrusting this boy with what the entire army couldn't handle. He just can't understand why the king has so much faith in him. Dion speaks up, saying he still hasn't fully recovered, while inside he's desperately begging the king to reconsider. Isilda mutters that the boy doesn't want to go, but Jakar counters that he's got it all wrong. If it were anyone else, maybe that's what they think. But he knows the commander is suppressing his thirst for combat because the logical choice would be for him to fight on an even stronger front line. The other one is astonished, admitting he hadn't realized all that. He's already excited, now convinced the boy isn't just strong, but also judges situations with clarity. The king then clarifies that he's not asking the boy to go on a killing spree. He just wants him to head there, relax a bit, and manage things. But Dia knows this is going to be tough and he doesn't want to go at all. Still, with everyone staring at him, glowing with expectation, he finally says fine, he'll go. He ends up riding in the carriage, once again finding himself dragged into something he has no idea how to deal with. As soon as the king gets back to his quarters, Diem is already packing his bags and leaving. At least he got away from that problem. But deep down, he knows life outside won't be much better. Closer to the Empire, there's the Mad Emperor, the one who originally ordered him to come kill the Demon King. On top of that, there's his older brother, who hates him and has always wanted him dead. He tries to focus on the bright side. The Zeroth group is very competent. Ed, in particular, is one of the strongest. When the soldier says they've already arrived at the village, he immediately orders them to hold formation. Dion tries to calm himself down. He doesn't really have to do much. All he needs to do is stay quiet and everything will sort itself out. Meanwhile, he's drinking the Demon King's special wine, which he had obviously stolen before leaving that meeting. At this point, he's more buried than alive, so he might as well enjoy it. It had been a long time since he felt this alive. Outside, Ed finds it strange that he's so silent. Could Dion be depressed because of that incident before they left? On the way out, our protagonist is heading toward the carriage when someone tells him he absolutely cannot ride a horse. He has to go in the carriage. Dion thinks to himself that's exactly what he's doing anyway. Why on earth would he want to ride those disgusting headless horses? So he steps inside, says fine, and folds his arms. While Ed is thinking that only time will heal a boy, he notices that Dion would actually prefer to be riding a horse. But ever since his health deteriorated, he's had to suppress his own desires. Even so, he can only follow the king's orders, and the king had told him to use the carriage. Just then, a demoness at the front announces they've arrived at Adjuvant Village, but the whole place is engulfed in flames. Bodies everywhere, the people clearly massacred, and the creatures had already wiped out the town. Ed warns them to be careful, because those monsters shouldn't be far off, and sure enough, there they are right ahead. He orders everyone to prepare for battle and protect the commander, saying he trusts them all. The demons charge forward and the fight erupts. But Ed quickly realizes these monsters seem endless. Suddenly, a massive werewolf lunges to bite him, and he notices he let his guard down. The scene shifts to someone asking the king if his army alone will be enough. It's Jakar, pointing out that there are too many monsters and they should have sent more support. But the king insists that the Zeroth group is extremely powerful, and besides, even if they face danger, they can rely on that person. Wait, was that the protagonist who just slashed through? The beast drops dead, and Ed is left stunned at the monster's body lying on the ground. Right away, he calls out to the commander, but the boy points his dagger right at his face and asks if he's the enemy too. Ed realizes he's acting the way he does when he's drunk and quickly reassures him he's not the enemy. The protagonist then asks if that thing over there is the enemy. The wolf seems to leap at him again, and just like that, the boy slams into the ground with an explosion. What the hell? I thought he'd shake it off like Chad, but no. He's completely wrecked against the wall. He says now he knows who the enemy is, then charges in with a flurry of slashes, saying it's time to go insane. Another 4 or 5 monsters rush from each side, but all it takes is him gripping the dagger tighter and cutting through everything. The rest of the army is frozen in shock, just watching the commander, the one who never leaves a body intact. He grabs one of the creatures and says it's her turn. Everyone knew he never stopped cutting until he was certain the enemy was dead. The remaining monsters are even afraid to attack as he finishes off yet another one. The scene then shifts to a castle, where someone informs His Majesty that he's seen the Zeroth group. According to the reports, they were just as strong and merciless as the rumors claimed. Emperor Eduardo of Desert says it reminds him of a certain person, and now that the demons have begun to act, they cannot sit still. He then declares they have the perfect person for this task. In other words, he's giving him the chance to bring honor to the Empire. The man humbly accepts His Majesty's command, and the Emperor orders him to become that kind of talent, which in theory is exactly the title of this story. The following chapter tells of the 8-year war where rivers of blood were shed in the name of the Empire's glory. On the front lines where warriors sacrificed themselves for the cause, the protagonist says they weren't soldiers at all. They were nothing but discarded meat shields. That place was the perfect description of hell. While the warriors kept fighting, shouting that everything was for the king, Dion could only think it was a joke. He never asked to be there. He had no intention of giving his life for the Dan Empire that had thrown him into this hell. All he was doing was his best to survive. Dying for them was never an option. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind him, identical to him. It came closer and told him to stay alive then and to take his revenge. Right after that, the protagonist woke up in bed, gasping for air, wondering what kind of dream that was. He stood up, staggering a little until someone said that he had finally woken up. It was Ed, clearly worried, and Ben saying he had been terrified when he saw him covered in blood. The protagonist, however, had no idea how he ended up there. That's when the blonde explained that the hunt had been a success. He had lost consciousness after slaughtering countless monsters. He even apologized for not being stronger and able to help more. The protagonist, though, had no clue that the blessing had ended and wanted to know what this business about him blacking out was. Ben then said he must have suffered memory loss from being so badly injured. DM was confused, but he did remember taking a sip of that drink and then smashing into the rock. Could it be that he got drunk and did something stupid? But this wasn't just any wound. He had completely blacked out, not remembering anything that happened. Ben tried to calm him down, saying the army had completed the mission without a single casualty and that the boy was truly an inspiration. Dean, though, was convinced he hadn't done a thing. The doctor told him to stop being modest, but he just wanted to understand how the rest of the army managed everything. He even apologized to Ed for getting involved and causing so much trouble. But Ed smiled, saying the opposite. He was phenomenal. The way he took the initiative and wiped out the creatures was the very definition of a commander. Still, Ben advised him to start taking things easier. Even if he was strong, his body was still injured from other battles, so it would be better to take care of himself. Dion remained lost, not remembering killing any monsters at all. So now the question was, does he only become strong when he's drunk, or does he always forget his fights? Ed reassured him not to worry, that the army would only grow stronger and that he could count on them. Dion, however, just felt uncomfortable. He wanted those bastards out of his room. And that's when two more walked in, one beauty and the other a big musclehead, saying they had heard he was awake. The other one told her to shut up because he was still recovering. The two of them argued about paying proper respect to the commander until Jakar arrived and ordered them both to be quiet. They were only there to check on him, not to make him feel uneasy. They apologized, but by that point, Diem was sick of it and told everyone to just leave the room, while thinking to himself how he could make these bastards disappear for good. The others assumed he was just stressed from the situation, and Jakar even told him not to go killing everyone in the castle. Dean, of course, was confused. How was he supposed to kill those three? Not even a miracle could make that happen. But then he remembered, if they ever discovered he was weak, they wouldn't show him an ounce of mercy. At that moment, he imagined that if he showed mercy instead, maybe it would increase his own chances of survival in the future. Maybe, just maybe, they might even try to spare his life if they ever found out the truth. That's when Isilda apologized in case he had upset him, and Diem replied that yes, he was stressed about all of this. Meanwhile, he was thinking that from now on, he needed to be very careful with the words he chose. The others were hesitant, but then he told them that being angry never justified violence. Many times, the best course of action was mercy, and they had better remember that word clearly. Even if one day someone lied to them or turned out to be weaker than them, that person still deserved mercy. As he sat there, he was thinking he hoped they would truly remember it. But the group looks a little down, only saying they understood. DM can't figure it out. Are they thinking he's just a loudmouth human who talks too much, or what? Jakar, however, simply thinks it's a strange way of showing forgiveness. Then he says the mission was a success and praises his work. Idelia, all cheerful, says that everyone in the castle is talking about his heroic act and how he wiped out half the creatures on his own. The protagonist just thinks that's a false rumor. He wants to know who's out there giving him credit for someone else's work. Seeing Ed smiling like an idiot, he wonders why that bastard is grinning so much. That's when Asil speaks up, saying he heard about his performance and came to make a formal request. Dion asks what it is. The guy then says that once he's fully recovered, he wants the chance to fight him. But this bastard is the third in command of the king's personal guard. Dion knows he doesn't stand a chance. Now it's pretty clear, isn't it, why the king gave him grape juice instead of wine. He hesitantly asks if the guy really wants to duel him. Obviously, Isilde answers excitedly, saying yes, is eager to see just how amazing he is and maybe learn a thing or two. Jakar agrees, saying it'll be interesting, while thinking to himself that the commander has never actually fought anyone in the army. This would be the perfect chance to witness his skills with his own eyes. Idelia is just as thrilled, curious about who this strong person really is and what his fighting style looks like. It would be incredible to see. Dion wants to back out, but all three of them are there, glowing with excitement. He's dying to say no, but what will they think if he refuses? The problem is, just one look at Asilde and it's obvious that guy could finish him with a single punch. So he replies that it's not a good idea. The fight against the creatures is still fresh in his mind, so there's always the possibility of death. But Isilde thinks the boy is just scared of fighting him. The protagonist realizes, of course, that the excuse isn't working. Jakar then says he's impressed with such confidence, because in his eyes, the commander is refusing out of fear of killing poor Isilde. Isilde freezes, staring at Dion, embarrassed, and asks if that's true. Dion, startled, doesn't even know what to say. Jakar warns Isilde not to press the issue, because the commander only refused out of fear of killing him. At that, Isilde trembles and asks if it's really true. He's certain he'd die in a fight. In his mind, he's already convinced that the commander believes without a doubt that he would win. And here he is, confident, thinking he might actually stand a chance. Now it's clear to him why the king puts so much trust in the boy's talent. He lowers his head and admits that it's hard to say, but he isn't even sure he would win or come out alive. If it really came down to a life or death fight, he'd rather not take part. His pride might be wounded, but he thanks the boy for being so considerate about everyone's safety. Dia notices that Isilde actually seems at peace with it. Meanwhile, Ed is impressed that even the most aggressive demons show respect toward him. The protagonist, at least, feels relieved to be off the hook. But then Isilde adds that he hasn't given up. When he's strong enough not to die so easily, he'll make the request again. Obviously, that's the worst option for our boy. He's just hoping the guy will give it up already. But Isilde declares he's motivated to keep getting stronger so he can come back for the challenge. He says goodbye and heads off to training. Jakar compliments the protagonist, saying that Isilde had been down lately, but with just a few words, he managed to restore his energy. The protagonist, however, is already staggering and Ed steps in to help, apologizing to everyone and explaining that the commander needs rest. They apologize as they leave, while Dean is once again wishing he could escape this place. That's when Jakar says that after he fights Isilde, he wants a match too, and he's already looking forward to it. The protagonist collapses on the bed and says he's going to sleep. He needs to get out of this demon kingdom soon. Sometime later, outside, he's exhausted. It's Ed all day inviting him to talk with the army, the doctor telling him to focus on recovery, and demons calling him to spar. He can't understand why everyone wants to interact with him so much. Frustrated, he kicks a rock, yelling for them to leave him alone. But that rock ends up hitting a couple of demons in the head right up front. Obviously, they're not happy about it and turn around to see who it was. But then they see Dian freeze and immediately bow, wishing him good night and apologizing for making noise. The protagonist has no idea what they're talking about, but they explain there had been an incubus causing trouble, and they were trying to move him away. Now that same guy is standing there trembling, even though he supposedly has one of the most overpowered magics in the world. Everyone else scattered, but the protagonist doesn't know what to do with this guy still shaking in front of him. The boy thinks he's done for. He knows the commander is quiet but more brutal than any demon when angered. He even cries, saying this is the day he dies. But Dian, acting gentle, reaches out his hand and tells him to stand up, saying the others already left. Strangely, the demon looks touched, wondering why he's being treated this way. He says he's an incubus, and that he knows everyone despises him. Dian just takes his arm, pulls him up, and asks why he thinks that way. He pats his shoulders and tells him not to worry. The demon, overwhelmed, says Dian is too kind, and that it makes him happy. Maybe he could repay the favor if Dian ever has free time. Hold on now, Incubate usually give women peculiar dreams, while Succubi do that for men. What exactly is this kid planning for our boy? Meanwhile, the demon asks where Dian is going, but Dian has no idea what kind of time this guy is talking about. The incubus then offers a small gift of gratitude, a plant that will help him recover. He says he knows Dian is a commander with a lot to do, but if he wants, he can take him to where it grows. Dian didn't even know the castle had a garden with plants like that. The little demon apologizes for not introducing himself earlier, saying he's the gardener who takes care of the castle known as Heen. DM is surprised that such a peaceful job even exists in such a violent world. He's already imagining beautiful flowers, a calm scene, and fresh air, a perfect place for some therapy. He admits he really does need a relaxing place and asks Heen to take him there. Heen tells him to follow, while Dian celebrates the thought of finally getting some rest. And so they arrive. The garden's actually kind of cute, the boy remarks. The smell of fresh plants and clean air surrounds him. But of course, the first plant he sees tries to take a bite out of him, and he barely dodges in time. Heen quickly scolds the plant, saying it's being naughty and shouldn't bite visitors. Was it looking to learn another lesson? The plant immediately droops, and Heen apologizes, saying it was just too excited to see him. The protagonist, however, is sure the plant noticed he was weak and attacked right away. And now it's clear what kind of garden this really is. It's better to get out of there fast. So he says he just remembered he has something else to do and waves goodbye. Heen asks where he's going, and Dion answers that he's heading to the training hall. He needs to meet with the army and practice as soon as possible. He says goodnight and leaves Heen standing there, confused, thinking it must really be something urgent. Next time, he decides they'll give him a gift, since Dian seemed to like the plants so much. Meanwhile, the protagonist can only shiver at the thought. He was stupid to think anything in this place could ever be normal. All he wants now is to get back to his room, the only peaceful spot, before he runs into anyone else. After all, he wants to avoid the army because he's sure he got drunk, made a fool of himself, and embarrassed himself. He remembers Ed telling him to give some kind of motivational speech since he never does anything. But the truth is, that was just his way of interpreting it. The guy never actually said anything like that. So he heads over to the training hall, which is completely empty. Nobody had arrived yet, and since he's supposed to give that speech, he wonders where he should sit. Then he notices some wooden swords and decides to pick one up to practice a little. He doesn't remember anything because he was drunk, but at least now he'll get the chance to see these guys in action. But But the moment he swings the sword, it hits the ground and he realizes it's way too heavy. It's embarrassing to admit, but he can't even lift a wooden sword, let alone a steel one. With muscles this pathetic, it's better for him to stick to just a dagger. But then he notices something beside him. There's a whole group of demons staring at him wide-eyed. The protagonist wonders if they just saw what happened. But in their eyes, he's standing there, glaring at them all, ready for battle. Everyone gets excited, asking if the commander is alright, saying he had them all worried. They start praising him, talking about how incredible he was on the last mission, that they'd never seen anyone like him. Dion tells them all to calm down while trying to figure out what in the world these lunatics are even talking about. On top of that, everyone's looking at him emotionally, and he doesn't get why. So he turns and says that unfortunately he couldn't come here after the mission, but he compliments the work of everyone who participated. Dion's real goal is to give them as much freedom as possible, let them train and do what they want. So he tells them they don't need his help since they're already excellent at their jobs. But suddenly, one of them draws his sword and charges. The protagonist stumbles at that exact moment. He doesn't want to fall. It would be humiliating in front of everyone. But as he crouches, the blade slices past him. Shocked, the guy asks how he managed to dodge. Dion has no clue, but everyone else is rushing in, asking if the commander is okay. The protagonist realizes he isn't safe here and tries to turn quickly, but in doing so, he accidentally elbows the guy in the face, knocking him flat on his back. The man shouts that he's a bastard, the damn demon a rut, and then the protagonist notices. This guy in front of him is human. Now that I think about it, in his dream, there were two versions of him, right? Could one of them actually be interfering? Because there's no way he's just this lucky. At that moment, the rest of the army calls for the commander, and the protagonist realizes nobody seems to know this guy. The man says he has to escape immediately, but as he turns to the side, Dion is already there, slashing down on him. The boy knew he couldn't let this guy escape. He was too dangerous. So he strikes him down without hesitation. The man collapses. Dion immediately orders them to notify the Demon King and lock the intruder up. He simply waves goodbye and walks away, while the others stand there thinking, damn, the commander must be disappointed with us. We let an intruder in, and in the end, he was the one who got attacked. Still, one of them is impressed with how natural his movements were. In one moment, he was walking casually, and in the next, he crouched in a perfectly fluid motion, dodged, and spun with an instinctive elbow strike. It was terrifying. This poor fool was taken out instantly. He was so exceptional that the rest of the army felt like they only served as his shadow. One soldier reflects that he's been training hard, but never imagined the commander was still this far beyond him. Everyone starts celebrating, saying they need to keep training so that maybe one day they can compare themselves to him. Meanwhile, Dion has sprained his wrist just from swinging that wooden sword around. But whatever, the army will handle that guy, so it's time for him to head back to his room. Sometime later, he wakes up groggy, and who's already there beside him, the damn king, saying he had been sleeping like a rock. The protagonist wonders if this is a dream, but the king tells him no, this is reality. He knows the boy just woke up, but insists that he come with him. That, of course, is the last thing Dion wants. He just woke up and only wants to rest. But if the king himself is there, it must be urgent. So he asks if it's about that intruder. The king places a hand on his shoulder and says yes, and tells him to come along. They descend the stairs, and the protagonist can't help but wonder why they're heading toward the castle dungeon. Could it be that the intruder is still alive, or maybe he said something important? But when they arrive, the man is torn apart, with corpses scattered around him. He had been completely destroyed. That's exactly what Dion asks, what happened during the night. The king tells him to take a closer look and asks if the man doesn't seem familiar. Dion finds him strange. He was a human, strong enough to slaughter countless demons, and he seemed to grow even stronger when facing the Demon King. Then Dion recognizes it. This man is what's known as a hero, and Dion knows very well that heroes, when fighting the Demon King, have only two choices. They can self-destruct, causing critical damage if the Demon King is nearby, or they can spread their power in the form of fragments, essentially granting others in the world the power of heroes. Most warriors choose the second path since the empire depends on those fragments, almost like having more heroes. On top of that, the honor of the second option is far greater than the first. The king, however, laughs bitterly, saying it's a joke that they would send a hero like this to the land of the sacred demons. Or maybe he wasn't a real hero at all, just a candidate or even a failed hero. Dion knows that an official hero would be much stronger, but doesn't change the fact that no hero would ever be wasted so easily. There must be some reason why this man was sent here. Dion then calls out to the king, asking to have a word with the man alone. The king agrees and says he'll wait outside, while the protagonist assures him it won't take long. Dion wants to understand if this man didn't bring any message and came straight to him, and why. That's when the man calls him Dion Hart and shouts that he's a damn traitor. His Majesty trusted him to become a hero, yet he betrayed the empire and sided with the demons. Suddenly, Dion starts laughing, saying this must be some desperate way to get his attention. In truth, the man was just disposable. The man tries to go on about him being a traitor, but Dion cuts him off, saying no. The very fact that he calls him a traitor only proves how worthless he is. He doesn't understand what he ever did to make the emperor hate him so much, to the point of sending him here to die. After all, the emperor knows absolutely everything. He knows why Dian is in the demon kingdom and what the final goal of all this is. So is the protagonist truly being abandoned, or is there actually a plan behind it? Now even this man is questioning if he had really been forsaken by the king. But Dian just waves goodbye, telling him to think very carefully before he dies. The man slams his fists against the ground, shouting that he gave everything for the empire, screaming that he will never forgive that cursed bastard. Outside, though, the protagonist reflects on how fragile loyalty really is. He shouldn't have even bothered. Talking to that man was a waste of time. The king then asks if he's finished. Judging by the look on his face, he already got all the answers he wanted. Dian replies that the decision is up to the king, but he believes it's better to kill the man. The king agrees, saying they'll take care of it. But in exchange, the boy will owe him a favor. The protagonist doesn't look happy, and the king explains that Jaker made an emergency request. This time, they weren't facing a candidate. They were going to face a true hero. And as they all know, heroes and demons are never a good mix. The protagonist, however, knows that if the one on the front lines isn't just some abandoned fighter, but a true hero, then the demons hardly stand a chance. But the king says he knows the boy must also be curious. What could the emperor be thinking, sending a fragment like that directly to them? This is his chance to find out. Suddenly, the protagonist wonders when exactly he ended up there, and in that moment, the demon is already approaching. I'm telling you, this boy has a split personality. Now it makes sense why he tricked that human earlier. It was the other side of him speaking, which explains why he suddenly seems so sharp. And now he doesn't understand where exactly the demon king is planning to send him. Still, there he is, waiting by the carriage. He remembers following the king down to the dungeon, but after that, he was outside with the king telling him to head out, which only leaves him more confused. Why does the king want to send him to the front lines? He doesn't know. But then Ed shows up saying they're ready. Dian says he understands, knowing that the new hero is about to appear. Since he has no choice, at the very least, he wants to see what this new hero looks like. And on that point, the king is right. He's curious too. Meanwhile, Ed is thinking that the hunt for those creatures quenched only a little of his bloodlust, but not enough. As dangerous as the situation at the front may be, the boy advances with a smile. At that moment, Lilino calls out sweetly to the commander, saying she missed him terribly. Dian, a bit confused, wonders what she's doing here. He feels uneasy because after the king, she's the second most powerful, and on top of that, she's the type that's difficult to figure out. Then, all cute and gentle, she says she knows he's heading to the front lines and that she brought him a little gift. He has no idea what it is and finds her suspicious, but the second she starts explaining it has protective powers, he grabs it immediately, saying it's perfect, as if he would ever refuse something that could keep him alive. But then he notices he accidentally patted her on the head. It gets emotional, saying how wonderful it is that she's helping the commander like that, while she says it's amazing how much he cares for him. The two of them gush about protecting him forever, while Dian tells them both to calm down and get moving already. In the carriage, he keeps wondering why everyone believes he killed that hero. He didn't. Not only did he not do it, he never even tried to stop the self-detonation, nor did he block the attack with his own body. Back then, he was just another comrade. That warrior with the brown hair calls out to him, telling him he wants Dian to leave. The protagonist, confused, asks if he's sure, and the man confirms. He was a soldier of the Imperial Army. It was his duty to bring this fight to an end. Dian tries to say something, but the man cuts him off, telling him he's already done more than enough. Besides, the Demon King is a being stronger than anyone, and he can no longer guarantee everyone's survival. Since at least one person has to deliver the information back to the Empire, that person must be him. And he knows Dian still has things he needs to resolve. That's why he wants him to leave. He knows Dian is meant for great achievements, and that's why he must live and return to the Emperor. With that, he waves goodbye and wishes him good luck. A long time passes, and Dian finds himself wondering if the battle is finally over. He wants to know if the fight has ended, but he can't move, whether from guilt, shame, or something else, he isn't sure. But in the end, it's him who has to deliver the information. So he forces himself to stand and see what happened, preparing to return. That's when he comes face to face with the Demon King and the others surrounding the hero. The king asks for his last words, but the warrior only laughs and begins to shine. From above, Dian instantly knows it's self-detonation. From the looks of it, this is the end of it all, and it's time for him to carry the information back. But right then, there's a demon behind him asking who's there. The creature lunges, shouting that he's hiding like a rat. The strike smashes into the ground, but Dian manages to dodge. The bastard came out of nowhere without a single warning, and now he's screwed. Another attack comes, and he slips back just in time, getting only a shallow cut across his face. The problem is that now he has to survive and deliver the information. The monster charges again, but Dian avoids every strike, slips underneath, jumps up, and lands on the creature's head, slamming a hoe into its neck. The issue is, the monster reacts, and he realizes it didn't cut deep enough. He has no idea what to do now, and suddenly the entire mountainside crumbles, sending both of them falling. The demons watching all cover their faces as smoke and debris fill the air, while the protagonist wonders if he's even still alive. Then he notices at least the beast is dead beneath him. He had killed the ogre, but since he fell from the mountain, Now he's standing right in front of all the demons, who are staring, asking who this person is who just killed the 7th commander and how he's so strong. Right away, Dion knows he's in deep trouble. He killed a commander in front of the enemy's army, and worst of all, the Demon King himself is standing there staring directly at him. At that moment, someone calls his name. It's the warrior, demanding to know why Dion is there, asking if he knew about the self-detonation. Dion apologizes, admitting he failed his mission to escape. The man answers that he wanted Dion to survive more than anyone else. To him, Dion was the kindest person he had ever known, and he wished for him to be the next hero. He then asks if the world is watching this and pleads for the boy to continue living. Instead of triggering self-detonation, he begins to shine, transferring fragments of his power into the protagonist. The Demon King immediately recognizes it as a power transfer, but Dion knows such a thing is impossible. He says the warrior really was foolish. He should have known it's not possible to deliberately pass on all that power to someone else. He was an idiot to stop the self-detonation just to attempt it. Dion lays him down, thinking that in the end he doesn't feel any different. He's still the same weakling as always, but the demons around him are whispering, wondering if he just survived the explosion of a hero. Still, it's obvious it came at a heavy price. He drops to his knees, coughing up blood. Dion, however, knows one thing for sure. He came far, but this was the end of his story. That's when the king asks why he's smiling and demands to know his name. He says his name is Dion Hart. The king replies that he likes him. The boy is looking for a chance to escape, but instead the king offers him the chance to fight at his side. Dion is left stunned, and the king simply explains that no one will object. After all, everyone here saw what he just did. He killed a commander and endured the attack of a hero. Dion realizes he somehow managed to survive, but this wasn't the way things were supposed to go. And so it was that everyone in the castle came to believe he had the strength to kill a commander and withstand the attack of a hero, an attack powerful enough to kill even the Demon King. At that moment, Ed opens the carriage and announces that they've reached the border between the Demon Kingdom and human lands, the front line, where the battle never ends. Jakar shows up, battered and worn, saying they had been waiting for the boy. With his hands trembling, he admits he should have fallen back instead of coming to this place, but in the end, Dion never really has a choice. He laughs, saying life is a curse. Jakar thinks only the commander would arrive at the battlefield laughing, eager to fight, but he asks the boy to hold himself back a little, because his moment is coming. Dion has no idea what moment he's talking about, and of course, Jakar explains that he and everyone else will be joining the battle as soon as the Empire attacks again. Now I can't stop thinking, why does the king know that he absorbed the power and didn't just tank it? So who's playing fourth-dimensional chess here? Dear God, I need answers. But then I remembered, back when he was possessed in the cell, he told the other guy that he had an agreement with the Emperor, who knew everything. Could it be that the Emperor is controlling his second personality? My God, I need to stop overthinking and just follow the story. Eventually, I'll find out. Meanwhile, on the Empire's front lines, word spreads that the Zeroth unit had arrived together with their commander. Apparently, his presence lifted the spirits of the troops, while on the other side, the humans weren't nearly as motivated. The captain hesitates. He hadn't expected that the commander, the king's trump card, would actually show up there. He'd heard this guy was the most exceptional of them all. The man on his right asks what they're going to do now. It's no longer possible to guarantee victory. The captain replies that they'll have to send the assassin. But the mustached officer argues that the chances of success are minimal. The captain answers that they at least need to confirm if this man really exists. The rumors are terrifying, but maybe it's all been fabricated. Some illusion created by the Demon King to keep his soldiers' morale high. This then is the current human hero, known as Cruel. He says that if an assassin can confirm the existence of this boy, that alone would already count as an achievement. The scene shifts to Ed wrapping bandages around our boy, who is of course trying to figure out how to escape the battle entirely. The problem is, he's the commander of Zeroth, right? How is he supposed to walk away from that? Ed asks if he's okay, finding it hard to bandage him properly because he keeps trembling. Dion says yes and tells him not to overdo it. There's no need to be so careful. After all, his real plan is simple. Take one look at the hero, then bolt. But Ed just stares at him with a worried face, saying the war could break out any minute, and of course he needs to be careful. He even gets angry that the boy never takes care of himself. Dion can't understand why this guy cares so much about him. All he ever does is cough up blood and faint. Why do they put in so much effort for him? Maybe Ed's really an angel disguised as a demon, at least until he blurts out that they're prepared to wipe all those bastard humans off the face of existence. And just like that, our boy ends up wrapped up like a mummy, apparently with some special treatment created by the Demon King himself to keep him from losing even a bit of body heat and to maintain his health at the maximum. On top of that, he's given a magic cloak, and Ed says it must mean the commander is incredibly valuable. The protagonist thinks the demon probably acts like this because he has enough power to burn. After all, demon's magic is limited and mana once spent can't be restored. There's even a legend that the more mana demons use, the sooner heroes appear. So if the king is throwing it around so carelessly, it must mean he's confident he'll win against the next hero. But with that, the mummy-wrapped protagonist was now prepared for war. And Ed, full of excitement, says he's certain that the Zeroth unit will win this time. Dion just thanks him and says he'll take a look around the battlefield and the troops. Ed is left emotional, saying he's never seen him so motivated. But Dion's real goal is to find the perfect place to hide, until of course he runs into everyone, who are all thrilled to see the commander standing there in the flesh. Everyone is shouting that now they'll surely win, while Jakar agrees with the king that the boy's presence boosts everyone's morale. But high up in a tree, someone is watching, and he finally lays eyes on the infamous commander of Zeroth. So the boy was real after all. He looks smaller and weaker than expected, but that unnatural calm before battle and the intense aura radiating from him prove that he's not someone to be underestimated. Maybe the rumors really have been exaggerated. The assassin could either retreat now to confirm the boy's existence, or he could test how good he really was. He chooses the latter and throws a poison dart at Dion, who, as always, just as it's about to hit, crouches down and accidentally trips. The assassin stares in shock, then bolts in panic. Meanwhile, our boy is utterly confused, stumbling over rocks before the war even begins. He's certain he's going to die. Someone up front asks what just happened, and he stands up, saying he was just stretching. But the problem now is that everyone's watching him, so how is he supposed to find a safe place to hide? The man in the tree sees him walking back and realizes maybe he wasn't spotted. Or perhaps he simply doesn't want to alert anyone yet and instead sends his most skilled subordinate to hunt him down. Still, he can't be sure. The encounter wasn't enough to confirm the boy's true ability, so he decides this next attempt will be a final chance. Just then, Ed asks what's wrong. Had he already finished the inspection? Dion says yes and quickly changes the subject, asking about the new hero from the Imperial Army. His friend replies that the man has kept his face hidden behind a helm ever since he appeared, but everyone knows he's an exceptional swordsman. From the rooftop, the assassin listens, realizing they're talking about Lord Cruel. Could it be they already discovered he was the one who sent him? At that moment, Dion suddenly blurts out, "What's this over here? Alcohol?" He's furious. There shouldn't be any Turks there. And worse, he's angry because they won't let him drink, yet the others are drinking freely. Ed apologizes, saying it was actually prepared for the boy. Immediately, Dion's expression changes, and he asks if he can really drink it. Ed tells him, of course, pours it, and Dion thanks him. Our boy is thrilled, but then he hears a strange sound. He looks behind him, and Ed asks what's wrong. He answers it's nothing serious. But the assassin had thrown a pebble to distract him, and the moment Dion turned, he slipped poison into the cup. A poison so lethal, it could kill anyone instantly. The assassin is certain he's done for. Dion is about to take a sip. He raises the cup, hesitating, and Ed asks what the problem is. Suddenly, Dion hurls the cup to the ground, saying the place is full of insects. But even he wonders why the cup slipped from his hand like that. When Ed was pouring, a fly had been buzzing around, and as Dion lifted the cup, the insect kept buzzing by his ear, irritating him. He swatted at it without thinking, and the cup slipped. At this point, I'm convinced it has to be his second soul, that other personality at work, because there's no way he's this lucky. He starts to apologize, but Ed notices the cup on the ground sizzling with smoke and realizes it was poisoned. He looks around but finds nothing, only warning that an intruder was here. At that very moment, the assassin flees in desperation, muttering that he must report back to the Empire. Lord Cruel had to be told the commander of the demon army was extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, Jakar announces that someone had infiltrated with the clear goal of assassinating the commander. Everyone is confused, wondering how no one noticed. But Jakar warns them all that they'll be punished later for allowing enemies to get so close. Dion stands just behind him, sweating cold. He had almost died. Ed, disappointed, apologizes, calling himself incompetent for failing to sense the intruder. Dion replies that he's actually impressed even Ed didn't notice, which only proves the assassin was incredibly skilled. He thinks to himself it's about time he was relieved of this position anyway. Being commander is like painting a target on his back. Worst of all, he didn't even get to drink because of that damned assassin. Then he notices a bottle in someone else's hand. Right away, he calls out to Ed, who insists he'll accept any punishment, but Dion just wants to know, was that bottle of wine brand new? He said yes, so our boy grabs the bottle from the other guy's hand and says the poison was in the cup, not in the bottle. That means there's no problem at all drinking this. The protagonist, acting like some drunk uncle, ready to risk his life just for a drink. Back at Cruel's base, the guy is reporting that DM is dangerous. He's 100% sure now that the rumors were true and they don't stand a chance against him. Cruel looks shaken since the assassin they sent wasn't some amateur, and yet he came back completely wrecked. The only way they could win against that guy would be if they had that certain person. The mustache guy asks if he's talking about the other Imperial hero, and Cruel says yes. Only that hero, unfortunately, isn't available. Their only option might be to retreat. That indecisive guy chimes in again, saying if they retreat now, everyone will think they're just too scared of the commander. Cruel slams the map and says they will retreat, but whoever dares to chase them will meet a perfect death. Besides, it's not worth raising their swords in this piece of land where the sun doesn't even rise. His real plan is to make it clear to the demons that if they don't invade human territory, they can also stay at peace. The mustache one agrees, but wants to know what he should report back to the Empire. Cruel just says he was ordered to reclaim the lands the demons had taken, not to expand even further. Now that they've taken back what was theirs, there's no reason to push ahead, Aswik will report. Cruel feels calm. This won't ruin his first outing as a hero. At the very least, it will keep people from doubting what he's capable of. All he hopes now is that those demons don't cause too much trouble. The mustached guy tries to reassure him, saying he heard this so-called commander barely even joins the fighting. But right then, someone bursts in calling for the commander, saying the demons are advancing together with Zeroth's troops. Exactly what Cruel didn't want. And sure enough, our boy is there, slicing through everyone. He's drunk, dagger in hand, just tearing people apart like crazy. The kid is dropping bodies non-stop, while Ed just stands there watching. After he finished the bottle, he decided to push everyone into an all-out offensive. Ed isn't about to complain though, after all, they've got the upper hand because of it. Another guy collapses, and when he looks up, he only sees Dion and recognizes him as the very incarnation of a demon. If that wasn't the most dangerous creature alive, then he had no clue what was. Crying in despair, he knows if he doesn't fight, he's dead, but he's too terrified to even pick up his sword. Soon enough, there'll just be another body lying on the ground full of cuts. DM tells him straight to his face not to just stand there, to at least try something. He had to give everything he had to survive, or he'd die way too quickly. But just then, an attack smashes straight into him, sending the kid flying into a tree. Ed rushes over to help, spinning around to demand who dared to do that. And of course it was the hero himself, saying that strike was meant to finish Dion in a single blow. Ed looks worried and asks if the protagonist can still get up. Dion realizes he survived thanks to that protection Lennel had given him. While Ed is panicking, the guy who had fallen earlier is overwhelmed with emotion, convinced the Empire's hope has arrived. He celebrates, thinking he's safe now, only for Dion to walk past him and slice him apart, sending his head flying. Brutal. Then the protagonist goes straight up to the warrior, saying he had been looking forward to meeting him. Cruel answers that hero was just a generous title, but Dion is curious, saying people have been talking about him non-stop. What struck him as strange, though, was how familiar his voice sounded, like they'd met before. So why doesn't he take off that helmet? Cruel replies that he won't remove his armor in front of an enemy. Besides that, he wasn't feeling at all like the person standing in front of him was familiar. And as he kept watching the boy, he wondered why this guy was even saying that if they had never met before. Dion, who was fooling around with his little dagger, suddenly said fine, if that's how it was, then he just had to end it. The attack was aimed straight at the eye, but Dion managed to duck, realizing the boy was faster than he expected, though he still managed to land a counter with his dagger. Both of them stepped back and Dion praised his speed. Right after that, Cruel rushed in again and Dion had to defend himself. That's when he said he'd have to find out whether this guy was really a hero or not. Cruel launched a flurry of attacks, saying this was the test, while noticing that no matter how fast the commander was, his strikes were light. One more hit to the hand sent Dion's dagger flying, and from the look of it, the protagonist wavered there for a second. Cruel saw it as the perfect chance to finish him right then and there. But Dion quickly pulled another dagger from his leg and blocked the next strike. They glared at each other, then Dion landed a hard kick, and once again they both backed off. Cruel kept thinking his attacks were too light. Maybe the guy wasn't even taking this seriously. But for him it didn't matter. If that was the case, all the better. Then Dion wondered if the guy had already noticed. He raised his hands and said it had been fun, but now it was time to end it. Cruel answered that the war wasn't over, not when they were the ones who had invaded first. But Dion shot back that it ended the moment they killed the commander of the 9th troop. Besides, they had already reclaimed the land they wanted, so they shouldn't even be trying to invade the demon kingdom anymore. Cruel told him to shut up, but Dion kept pressing, saying they didn't need to waste more energy because both sides could just be satisfied defending their own territories. Cruel knew it wasn't such a bad offer. He had already taken back what he wanted, and the fight hadn't even been that costly for his side. The problem was that he felt if he pushed just a little further, he could defeat this commander. That was when Dion told him to take a look at his own army. When Cruel turned around, and everyone was exhausted and completely drained, no one was ready for this fight. So he answered fine. This time they'd retreat. He knew they were at a disadvantage, and pulling back now was the smartest plan anyway, and also the one he had already wanted to follow. Dion waved goodbye, saying he hoped they'd never see each other again. Cruel ignored him, turned his back, and went to rejoin his army. Meanwhile, the demons were all celebrating, saying it had been a nightmare, but luckily they had a commander they could trust. Jakar, however, wondered if that decision was really the right one. The Empire had lost the will to fight, and this had been the perfect chance to press forward. Still, he saw that Dion had been eager for a fight, so he must have had a reason to call it off. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and praised him. But at that moment, Dion only muttered for him to go to hell and then collapse, groaning that this body really was a curse. Jakar noticed his body was burning up and asked himself if he had truly fought at that level in such a condition. Maybe that explained why he had chosen to stop the fight, so the enemy wouldn't notice the state his body was in. If he got lost right there in front of all those demons, it would have crushed the morale of the entire army. In the end, it had been a perfect judgment of the situation. No wonder he had suddenly appeared and risen to commander. From the moment he defeated the 7th Squad's commander, or when he blocked the hero's explosion, or when the king himself recognized the ability he possessed, it was all enough to prove just how talented he really was. But even so, Jakar still had some doubts. Yet today, once and for all, he saw that Dian truly deserved the title he held. From now on, the demon could finally rest easy, because Dian would handle the rest. At the Demon King's castle, Lillinel suddenly jumps up in a panic because the crystal she'd given him just shattered. No creature should have been able to do that, and she's really worried he must be in danger. She says she's heading out right now to see what happened, while the attendant begs her to stay because the Demon King ordered her to guard the barrier. Meanwhile, John is already arriving and the Demon King praises his work. Our guy glances over and the king happily keeps complimenting him, saying Jakar told him John did an exceptional job. He wants to know how meeting the new hero went, and John says he'll need to report on him. The Demon King notices the kid looks tense from that battle and says they'll talk later because it seems the commander of the second group also has some intel. That commander apparently liked trying to dress our protagonist up in outfits, and the king notices he doesn't seem to miss her much. But you shouldn't worry. She's far away for now. They're only going to look over some documents. Looking through the papers, Dion spots something odd. Suddenly, someone calls for the commander, and that's when he finally comes to. Up to that moment, he'd been stuck in that wild split personality state. Now he's wondering how he ended up in the Demon King's castle. What happened? He wasn't on the front line. He woke up because Lillinel is clinging to him, snotty and sobbing, saying she was worried about him. DM is obviously still trying to process everything and remembers that once again, he drank. He can't believe a single bottle made him completely black out like that. While Lillinel is drooling on his clothes, saying she panicked when the necklace broke, Dion is shocked. Right? That thing protects you once from instant death. In other words, he really was at risk of dying. Even so, she praises him, saying he still beat the new hero, which is amazing. She's stuck to him, hearts practically floating around, while he realizes that booze keeps making him lose his mind. Then he notices the sheet in his hand and opens it to read the name Cruel Heart. Wait, that's his same last name. He laughs because this is someone he could never forget as long as he lives. That guy is his older brother. We then see Cruel talking to Dian, who's wrecked and crying. The boy asks his brother for help, but the brother lifts his sword and slashes him. What the heck? Now it makes sense why the kid ran into the demon's arms. That family is worse than the devil. Diem strokes Lillinel's head and says he has things to take care of. The purple-haired one says he's really scary and asks if Lillinel is okay. But she seems to think he got mad about something and finds it amazing, saying he looks gorgeous when he's all riled up. Back in the room, Dian asks why the Emperor made that bastard a hero if he knows everything that happened, especially now when Dian was thinking about going back. We then see the Demon King had asked whether it wasn't time for him to visit the Empire. Dian says yes, and that if he allows it, he'll gather information on the new hero. The king tells him to travel safely, since if he stayed away from the Empire too long, people would get suspicious. He touches the boy's chest and places a spell on him so he'll always know where Dian is. The king waves goodbye and says to report as soon as he has anything useful. That was a conversation the two of them had, but Dian still doesn't know why he has to be the Demon King's spy. First off, it's obvious he always loses his memory when he's extremely stressed for dealing with something tough. And obviously, to avoid that, he needs to avoid stress. But that's not easy. At that moment, Ed mentions he heard Dian's heading to the human kingdom today. He says yes because there's something he personally needs to take a look at and wants to know what the problem is. Ed then brings up something the Demon King had said. We see that he'd asked Ed what he thought about becoming a commander. He mentioned it would be for the position of the 9th Army, which didn't currently have a commander, and the Demon King confirmed it. Ed had been working as Dian's assistant, but the king said he knew Ed was more than capable of being a commander himself. Ed paused to think. That had been one of his goals for a long time, but he set it aside to serve Dian. So he asked the king what would happen to his current position if he took that role. The Demon King simply answered that they would appoint someone else just as skilled to support Dian. He also added that Ed didn't need to push himself. If he refused, they could always find another commander. Of course, that would mean handing an important role to someone less capable. With that, Ed accepted. Dian, meanwhile, is trying to understand what he means by this. Strangely, Ed only replies that it's nothing and decides not to explain for now. He says instead that he'll ask the chefs to prepare whatever food Dian wants for his trip. Just then, someone comes in to say the carriage is ready. Dian says goodbye, telling them they'll see each other when he returns. But then he stops, thinking maybe Ed is kind of resigning, so he hesitates and doesn't mention it directly. Instead, he asks if there's anything Ed wants, since he won't be visiting the capital often. He's considering maybe some special food or something that would last a long time, while Ed laughs to himself, thinking no other superior would care that much about a subordinate. But he replies that he doesn't need anything. Dian says all right then and waves goodbye. Ed wishes him a safe trip, thinking to himself that he respected Dian more and more with each passing day. But we see that's not entirely true. In that earlier talk with the Demon King, Ed had said he didn't want to be a commander. It would obviously be something amazing, but for him, helping Dian was even more important. He wishes him a safe journey and swears he'll be waiting there for him for as long as he lives. Man, I get the feeling something tragic is about to happen. The next chapter begins with soldiers standing guard in front of a castle, complaining about how boring the day is. Then Dion shows up, and the soldiers tell him to stop, warning him that this is the Hart family mansion. The Count is away, and no one is allowed inside. But Dion just orders them to open the gate and pulls down his hood while they wonder who this confident young man is. At that moment, the protagonist removes his bandages and says he wants to go into his own house. So what's the problem? Immediately, everyone starts running, shouting, announcing that the Count has arrived, all bowing at the entrance. Crazy. I thought he'd be treated more harshly at home. They're thinking it's all unnecessary as usual. The butler, named Remember, welcomes him back. Dion smiles, saying it's been a while, and the man asks if the hunt went well. Hesitant and a bit confused, Dion answers yes, noticing that everyone seems to think he went on a monster hunt. He's about to say everything turned out fine when suddenly Remember touches his face and says it's a shame the monsters did something like that to him. Oh, come on, Remember, you're not that little maid from some blonde guy's story to be pulling that kind of thing. Get out of here. The protagonist says he's not a child anymore, and the man agrees, saying he's now a respected count. He asks if Dion wants them to clean his room, but Dion says no, because he's first going to see the Emperor. Of course, he would much rather just lie down and sleep, but now that he's back from the Empire, the first thing he needs to do is talk with this man. And besides, he has to ask about Cruel. The butler says he understands and that he'll make all the preparations. In the office, a purple-haired guy named Stave Illuster says that finally the Emperor's dog has returned to his master. Then he immediately asks Cruel, who's right there beside him, what they're going to do now that the little brother is back. Cruel simply replies that he'll send a request to the Assassin's Guild, but Stave warns that they could end up being tracked, and then asks Salin if they don't have that better option. The one with glasses wants to know if he's talking about the Revolutionary Army, and Stave says yes. A group motivated to rip the Emperor off the throne. Even if they get caught, that's not a problem. Cruel says fine then, he'll get in touch with those people. Stave gets excited, saying he's looking forward to the results from the hero. Back at the castle, the maids are all thrilled, saying our boy looks wonderful in that little cape of his. He's completely confused. From the moment he arrived, these weirdos haven't stopped for a second. They bathed him, changed his clothes, did all sorts of things. Worst of all, they're standing there imagining him in different outfits, striking different poses. He just decides he needs to get out quickly and thanks Remember for taking care of the mansion while he was away. Remember says it was just his job and then adds that he was actually waiting for Dion to return because he's been feeling really tired and wants to discuss retirement. Dion panics. This was the only person who could manage the place considering he himself does nothing. But then Remember laughs and says he was joking, leaving the boy furious and confused, telling him to just go already. Getting into the carriage, Dion says he doesn't need much security since very few people in the Empire know about his return. Now he's sitting there thinking, back in the demon realm, he had to flatter the demon king, and here he'll have to do the same with the Emperor. The worst part is, this man is no less intimidating than the demon king. Eduard of Desert is the 9th prince who seized the throne by force. He killed every one of his 8 brothers and sisters, killed the king, and took the crown. At least he earned it in a twisted way. But obviously the throne he sits on is soaked in blood, and the land that had once been known as a nation, from that day forward became known simply as the Empire. He was arrogant enough to rename the place, and of course the other kingdoms started pushing for war. That war dragged on for 8 years and turned Dion's life upside down, times so horrible that he can barely remember anything, which is probably for the best, since he has no desire to recall them anyway. During that war, Eduardo conquered another third of the continent and folded it all into the so-called Empire. In recognition of his role in that war, Dion was granted the title of Count. He doesn't remember clearly what he did, just that he had to fight for his life every single day. What he can't forget, though, is the life goal he set for himself during those times, even if that same goal eventually got him enslaved by both the demons and the Empire. While he's lost in these thoughts, the carriage starts shaking and he steps out to see what's going on. Outside, a fight is breaking out, and right away, Dion notices that the men have armbands marked with an eagle. At least they're stupid enough to be easy to recognize. But he also notices the fight isn't going well on their side, and suddenly one of them appears right next to him. He starts to turn, but the guy grabs him by the neck, and the whole area explodes. In an instant, he's on the floor of the carriage, and a man with an axe sneers that he's found the Empire's little dog. The Revolutionary Troop was an organization born during that 8-year war. As the kingdoms were brutally conquered one by one, the only thing left behind was the determination to eliminate the Emperor. The scarred man tells him this is his end. Dion, though, isn't trembling like someone about to die. He's staring the man down. But deep down, he realizes once again, it's all the Emperor's fault. But he had no intention of dying for these people's ideology. Then the guy sneers that he's pretty scrawny and have the title of hero. Dion tries to explain that he's not the Emperor's dog. Strangely, the man lets go and tells him to say his name then. Our boy answers, Dion Hart. Right away, the man grabs him again, saying he really is the cursed dog. White hair, red eyes, looking just like the rumors say. The protagonist tries to stab the distracted man, but he blocks the strike with the handle of his axe. Then he slams Dion back to the ground, saying the fun is over. Blood is already spilling everywhere, and our boy is getting battered badly. The man finds it strange that someone like him would be considered a hero. Maybe the rumors were false. He raises the axe and says to blame the Emperor for what's about to happen to this false hero. But just then, a spear comes flying, blocking the strike and knocking the axe to the ground. The scared man looks back and sees a few men laughing, and one of them says he hit right on the mark. Turns out these are Imperial soldiers, and honestly, it looks scarier than the enemies. These men in white robes are known as the Death Knights, demons who had once been led by Dion Hart back in the 8-Year War. The scared man orders someone to take them out, while wondering how they showed up so quickly. But one of the knights just pulls something out of a bag and says it's been a long time since he had a real fight. As he consumes it, Dion thinks to himself that what's terrifying about them isn't their skill, but the insane way they fight. They charge forward like a horde of zombies, killing with pure cruelty. Clearly, they're fighting for the fun of it. They're just like their master, bloodthirsty. Blood is gushing everywhere and everyone around is horrified. The scared man remembers why attacking Dion had always been a bad idea. Suddenly, he feels a strange pain. Dion's hand is buried deep in his arm. He hurls the boy against the wall, but his arm is already turned into a shredded mess. That has to be the other personality. You can see the evil glint in his eyes. Our boy apologizes, saying he tried to tear the arm in half but just wasn't strong enough. But he tells him not to cry. The pain will be over soon. With that, the arm is severed, and the body collapses to the ground. The protagonist steps out of the carriage, dripping with swagger, wearing those white clothes now soaked in blood. He picks up the axe, thinking this guy is already dead. Should he continue? But it doesn't feel like enough. He has to make an example of him so everyone knows what happens when they cross him. He really is brutal, absolutely ruthless. He unleashes a flurry of strikes, saying he needs to put on an unforgettable scene for everyone. The so-called Death Knights think to themselves. As always, their captain shows no mercy. The blonde one even mutters they probably shouldn't have come, but another knight tells him to look at the trash lying at Dean's feet. The men nearby are all shaken and defeated. Meanwhile, the protagonist, apparently having reduced the enemy to nothing but scraps, asks why they're still standing. There were still enemies left. It was their job to kill them. The poor ones in front of him are trembling like crazy, and the beating must have been bad, because the scene jumps back to the castle, where everyone is horrified at the sight of the blood-red carriage. Some guards shout that this is the Imperial castle, and he can't enter without an invitation. But the protagonist just says Dion Hart and declares that he's going to see the Emperor. Immediately, they beg forgiveness. He orders them to tell him where the Emperor is, and they say he's in the ballroom. He asks why, and they explain it's a celebration, a festival for the birth of the new hero and his victorious battle. The protagonist is still in that crazed state of mind, and now he hears they're celebrating the arrival of a new hero. The irony stings because he knows it's his own brother they're cheering for, and it leaves me wondering just how long has Cruel been beating down the protagonist like this? Because eventually, when he created that insane personality, he must have collapsed countless times. The scene shifts to the Emperor's throne, Eduardo Desert, who praises everything Cruel has done. Cruel replies that he only did what was necessary, but the Emperor stands and raises a toast to the success of the first mission, and everyone begins to celebrate. Suddenly, the doors swing open and Dion enters. Some people are about to scold him for barging in, saying it's unacceptable, but others already recognize the red eyes and white hair. The nobles there, likely all family members, are stunned. This was the honorary Count Dion Hart. Now it becomes clear he's not part of the Imperial family at all. He's really just like a butcher for the army. He walks past Cruel, thinking to himself that this man really did obtain a hero's fragment. Then he bows before the Emperor and proclaims glory to the Empire. Presenting himself to his majesty, the nobles whisper to look at the blood. No wonder he's called the Vampire Count. No one knows how he was raised, but rumors say the Hart family didn't treat the boy well. Stave, the purple-haired man, mutters that the cursed Dion actually survived. He was always a hard one to kill. At that moment, the Emperor looks around and sees that our protagonist has left a trail of blood behind him. What? Did he bring a bucket in his pocket? The Emperor welcomes the honorary Count Dion, saying he's always free to come anytime he wishes, but not drenched in blood in the middle of a celebration. What kind of insolence was this? The protagonist apologizes but explains he was ambushed on his way there. The Emperor laughs, wanting to know who dared attack the Empire's hero, silently relieved he had sent those knights to guard the boy. The protagonist remains silent. Then the Emperor rises and says Dion must have a lot to say. He also has things to discuss, so they should speak somewhere more private. Our protagonist really is both the Demon King's lackey and the Emperor's lackey, caught in a strange position. In another chamber, the Emperor is sure that the Revolutionary Army attacked him. He asks if Dion needs a doctor, all while thinking that Dion Hart has a severely negative reputation. Far more people in the Empire hate him than admire him. Yet it's undeniable. No one has done more for the Empire than Dion Hart. In the 8th War, he achieved things that couldn't even be put into words. And during the attack of the first hero, he was the only one able to bring the body back, the sole survivor of the demons. Everyone else became food for the monsters. Without Dion Hart, that warrior would have met the same fate. He was the first to survive anything related to the Demon King, but of course it came with a price. The Emperor asks if he's found a way to break the curse that Mark the Demon King placed on him. Dian answers that unfortunately, no. The Emperor doesn't know that the mark is actually tracking magic, a way for the Demon King to always know where he is. Eduardo, however, believes it's a magical circle that weakens him. The Emperor realizes the boy doesn't care about his own well-being. He had sent him to the demon realm before because that was the only chance to remove the mark from his chest. So now the Emperor tells him he'll have to return to the demon realm, even though he feels guilty about sending someone so talented back there again. Dian knows this speech is just a facade. The Emperor is only using him as a spy. Eduardo then asks how the demon castle is these days. Dian replies that nothing has changed except for one small detail. The Emperor presses him to explain, and Dian tells him about the assassin that had been sent there. It seemed like Eduardo simply wanted to dispose of that person, but he was actually a hero candidate. So why would he send someone like that into the demon realm? Eduardo explains that Guy had been nothing but a disgrace to the heroes. He thought he would die long before reaching the demon realm. But apparently, the fragment really did carry him that far. At least he died before revealing Dian's plan, or rather the plan of Commander Xeroth's troop, Demon Arut. The protagonist is stunned that the Emperor already knows even about that. He then rises and says it was impossible to refuse the position of commander. Unfortunately, he ended up having to take on the role. The Emperor replies that there's no problem with that. The more integrated he becomes with that group, the more intelligence he can gather. Then he asks what exactly the boy came here to ask. Dian immediately wants to know why Cruel Heart became a hero. He should know very well that Dian's only regret from the war was not killing Cruel when he had the chance. Aside from the protagonist, Cruel is the only survivor of the Heart family. Wait, so the only one who survived him? Did he kill his own parents? Well, if he suffered a lot of abuse, maybe that explains it. Then we see Cruel talking to him when he was a child, telling him he shouldn't keep their parents waiting. The little boy, all sweet, apologizes and asks if it's time for dinner. Cruel tells him to hurry up. The protagonist, though, seems hesitant, asking if they won't get in trouble or something like that. But his brother pulls his hand away, telling him not to touch, saying he's dirty from training. Awkwardly, Dian apologizes and asks Cruel to wait just a moment. He wanted to walk by his side, but his brother just keeps running. Suddenly, Dian bumps into his back with his head. Cruel turns and asks if he likes the painting so much. He always stares at it. Dian answers that yes, because it shows they're a family. Cruel dismisses it, saying it's just a painting. Then he orders the boy to stop showing up so much and to spend more time in his room. Dian always felt lonely in that house. The maids whispered in the halls that he was different from everyone else. For some reason, he had white hair and red eyes, which was strange. He probably wasn't a biological child of the family. But for the boy, whenever he looked at that painting, he felt like part of the family. He wished he also had black hair and green eyes, the signature traits of the Hart family. At the dining table, his father says Dian is late and reminds him he had told them to come quickly. Meanwhile, his mother asks if Dian is alright. If he has a fever or something like that, he can stay home that night. Dian says no, he wants to go alone. The father snaps at her to stop offering that, saying Dian can't stay at home forever. But she replies that she can't help but worry. He's extremely fragile and something could happen to him if he leaves. The father just gets more irritated, saying they can't keep locking him up forever. Eventually, he has to show his face in public, even if it means sparking rumors. He also warns Dian that he must be extremely careful never to let anyone find out about his flaw. With his head lowered, the protagonist says he understands and will be careful. That flaw, of course, is his unusual appearance and constant illness, and the fact that it tarnishes the reputation of the Hart family. Then Cruel asks about the new fencing instructor. Dian wonders if his brother deliberately changed the subject so they would stop focusing on him. The father laughs and says yes, especially since Cruel has been improving more and more each day. The moment he mentioned that teacher, the atmosphere at dinner changed. Back then, Dian was certain his brother was incredible, but even so, he wondered if the reason he couldn't feel like part of that family was because he wasn't good enough. But his plan was to train hard and become strong enough to be as good as his brother. And once that happened, the family would love him. Walking through the hallways, someone calls out to him. It's a group of odd-looking nobles, asking if he's Dian Hart. No doubt those three fools probably all got cut down in the 18-year war. The protagonist, poor kid, knave and clueless, didn't see the malice in them. He thought they were just some friendly boys who wanted to chat. All cheerful, he goes, "Hi, I'm Dian Hart." The boy immediately starts talking about fencing, but then one of the nobles in front asks why he's always alone. He must have been a bit slow because everyone already knew he was the black sheep of the Hart family, always hidden away and locked in his room. The protagonist tries to deny it, but the noble steps closer and says that his red eyes are extremely strange. Clearly, he doesn't belong to that family, which is why he doesn't get love and was abandoned. The noble is about to call him a stranger again when Dian punches him. He warns him to watch what he says, insisting that his family takes good care of him. But then he gets punched in the face again. At least he struck first, I can respect that much. Now he's just being beaten down with the boy yelling that he's not really a heart, but a monster. Dian is only thinking about his family. Soon he's lying on the ground, unconscious and twisted, when he sees Cruel rushing over in shock. The scene shifts to the infirmary where the doctor explains that his body is naturally very fragile. He's extremely vulnerable to stress, and anything around him can end up harming his health. His parents look shaken, saying there has never been anyone like that in the Hart family, so how is this possible? Lying in bed, almost at death's door, the protagonist apologizes silently. Looking at the two of them, he swears he'll try harder. He just asks that they don't hate him. But then his brother, still so sweet at that age, tells him it's fine. He doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. After all, nobody expected anything from him anyway. Strange, isn't it? And then, it turns out it was all a dream. Now he really wakes up in bed. His mother comes into the room asking what happened, while his father says he warned him to be careful while they were away. Hesitantly, the protagonist explains that it was those other kids who started it. He remembers them calling him a monster, and now he wonders if his father would even care if he said that. Maybe his father thinks the same thing those children did. He apologizes, and his father says perhaps letting him leave the room was too soon. He really will be confined for a while longer. Better he stay there and think carefully about what he's done. The protagonist can't believe that the one chance he had to go out, he only managed to cause more trouble. The last thing he wanted was to become a disgrace to the family. From inside the room while writing, he hears voices around saying they pity him because he never leaves. He hears his family laughing. He goes to the window and sees his father walking with Cruel. He wants to go out too, but at the same time he knows that would be too greedy. First, to have that right, he needs to work hard until he's recognized. Part 1 of the plan was to build up his stamina so he could endure 30 minutes of practice. But by then it was already night, and he said he was exhausted. He felt like he might die, but he couldn't stop. He kept swinging the sword until Cruel suddenly appeared and told him to stop. Only then did Dian notice his brother was there. Cruel asked what he thought he was doing, telling him to stop being stupid. He'd already ordered him to stay quiet in his room, and he'd already told him he didn't need to do anything. But the protagonist couldn't accept not even having the right to try. Maybe they didn't want that because he was a failure. Suddenly, though, he says, fine, he won't do anything. He apologizes to Cruel, tells him he's going to rest, and then tells him to leave. And so he stands at the window, wondering what he has to do to earn the right to be loved. Sometime later, the butler comes in and asks if he's going to eat in his room again. The protagonist, now 14 years old, asks where everyone is. Cruel, now 17, says they went out for something else. Dian thought he'd be at training, but Cruel just tells him to come along since he already finished his morning training and it's time for chess. The protagonist agrees while Cruel wonders why he's being so polite. It seems from time to time he joins in for this little game of chess. During it, Cruel mentions that the Empire is going through a turbulent period, and that's why the relatives are so busy. Dian, though, was certain he always used that as an excuse, just to give a reason for why they never visited him. Even knowing this, sometimes he chose to believe the lie, because on rare occasions their mother would appear thinking he was asleep. She'd place her hand on him, apologize, and wish him a good night's rest. The boy, poor thing, would be moved to tears, saying he had already decided not to expect any love, but even the smallest reaction would spark hope in him. At that moment, Cruel reveals that after this match, he too will stop playing chess for a while. The protagonist replies that he understands, thinking it must be troublesome to come all the way here to play chess all the time. But Cruel says no, it's because if a war breaks out, at least one family member has to be taken. Right as he says this, 2 men enter, and it's clear, by the end of it, with the protagonist who gets sent away, or maybe not. Now I'm curious, honestly. Cruel asks why they're there, and the soldier announces they've brought a message from the Empire. Where's the boy called Dian Hart? So that's it. The family locks him away, and now they're going to send him to die so they don't have to send Cruel. The butler points out that he's the boy sitting in the chair across from Cruel, and then the Imperial soldier immediately orders him to come along, saying they'll explain everything on the way. Dragged from the room, the other knights whisper to each other, wondering why they're taking a boy who doesn't even know how to hold a sword. At that moment, Cruel grabs the soldier's arm and says there must be some mistake. Dian isn't the one who should be sent. It has to be a misunderstanding. But the man yanks his arm away and says House Hart already sent an official letter to the Emperor. They're just doing their duty, and if he has questions, he should ask his parents. As he's taken away, the protagonist doesn't even understand what they're talking about. From what he picked up, it seems his parents are sending him to war. But he's someone who spent his whole life sick and locked in a room. What is he supposed to do in a place like that? He imagines his mother's face, strangely apologetic, and thinks it can't be true. They would never do that. He looks back, calling out to Cruel, but the door has already closed. In that moment, he wonders if his entire family truly wanted him dead. Maybe for them, it would be better to get rid of the failure that disgraced their name. I really want to see how this all connects later, because right now it's confusing. But then we're already with him, awkwardly holding a sword, while an army officer tells him he'd better toughen up if he wants to survive on the battlefield. The protagonist, poor thing, can only think about how heavy the sword is, and of course even the soldiers around him are whispering, asking why the disgrace of the Hart family was sent, the sickly boy who never took part in anything. Our boy, on the other hand, wanted nothing more than not to die. But from that day forward, his life became hell, and now we see him twisted and struggling, right in the middle of the battlefield. They really threw the kid into war. There were people dying everywhere, bodies falling on top of him, and all he could feel was fear. Fear of dying, surrounded by screams and the stench of blood. He was lying there under one of the corpses, crying out that he wanted to go home, when a soldier from the army rushed over and cut down the body lying across him. The soldier ordered him to get up, grab a sword, and do something. If he didn't know how to use a sword, then he should use his teeth or a dagger, whatever it took. He just had to fight to survive. The poor boy was panicking, saying he couldn't die like this. And then it started. He snapped, saying he would survive. From that moment, he began killing left and right, stabbing, slashing, striking in every direction. Sometimes he'd be terrified, coughing up blood, wondering how long his body would hold out. He wanted to know when he could return home, why he had to be there at all. Yet even so, he drove another dagger into someone's chest. Clearly, this boy had some natural talent. You can't just throw a 14-year-old onto the battlefield and expect him to last. But he did. Of course, years and years passed as he kept surviving. From time to time, letters arrived for those on the front lines, messages wishing them well, saying they were missed, things like that. But our boy, alone in his corner, only received one letter. It was to inform him he'd been promoted to commander and would now be sent to another front line. That was when he made his decision to turn House Hart into a house of horrors. And that cruelty began the moment the door opened and he entered, accompanied by the butler, or was it? Whoever it was, he said he had finally come to pay his respects. His father tried to speak, but he cut him down immediately. This family had been right to send him away. Their only mistake was not disappearing from the house altogether. They could have given him love too, but that was apparently too difficult. He said farewell and struck again, laughing like a madman, covering his face with his hand like the Joker. He said it was deserved. They should never have abandoned him that way. They should have given him the love he always wanted. Yet in that very moment, he wondered why it hurt so much, even though he had finally achieved the dream he held onto for so long. That's when Cruel opened the door and saw the boy, insane, weeping, drenched in blood. Shocked, Cruel asked him what he thought he'd done. The protagonist begged for help, but then stopped. A darker voice inside asked if he really thought Cruel would ever help him. Dian agreed with the voice, and then he attacked. Cruel had no choice but to defend himself. In his madness, the protagonist shouted that Cruel had always just stood by and watched everything. As the fight dragged on, he cried out that the pain was too much, remembering everything he'd gone through. Then, staring at his blood-covered hand, he realized his body had reached its limit. Cruel went in for the finishing blow, and all Dian wanted was to kill him before he died. But suddenly, he woke up, and now it's unclear whether it was a seizure, a collapse, or something else entirely. In that moment, a beautiful figure named Lion Rainer was beside him, asking what he was thinking about. He said it had been a long time since they'd seen each other. She replied that it was good to know he was doing so well. To him, she was the only person with a normal personality among this group of lunatics, and he felt genuinely happy to see her again. But then he realized they were in the ballroom and confusion set in. He had no idea what had just happened. That's when it became clear. We were back at the Emperor's celebration, the same one he had arrived at covered in blood. He only remembered being attacked by the revolutionary group in the carriage. So yes, we were back in the story's timeline. I had thought the whole massacre scene was some kind of false memory. But no, it seems he really did kill them all. Lane asked about his conversation with the Emperor, saying he didn't look well afterward. Of course, he had no idea what conversation she meant. He just thought that, apparently, the stress had pushed him to his limit, and he had blacked out once again. He wants to know what this event is about, and she answers that he must be joking not to know. How could he walk into this place without a clue? They were gathered to celebrate Cruel Heart's first victory. At that moment, Cruel himself appears and says it's good to see Dian. The protagonist replies that now it makes sense why he had such terrible dreams the night before. He says it's been a while since they've seen each other, while thinking bitterly that this bastard had the green eyes and black hair he always wanted, the true symbol of House Hart that he thought he'd never see again, and also the one person he didn't want to face. Cruel explains that he came face to face with the commander of Zeroth in the demon realm. The protagonist asks what the problem is, wondering if his brother has any idea that it was actually him. But Cruel goes on to say that person was skilled at motivating soldiers and somehow reminded him of Dian. He had never seen troops so spirited. He heard his brother had always been a good commander and wondered if maybe it would have been even better with him. Dian, however, bursts out laughing like a madman, apologizing but saying Cruel must be exaggerating. After all, there's no world where the two of them would fight side by side. Cruel simply replies that it's fine, while noticing that his brother's eyes hadn't changed, still carrying that cold, indifferent gaze toward anyone. The protagonist, filled with hatred toward this man who dared speak to him, turns away. He says he has other things to deal with and tells him not to bother him anymore. He goes off to eat some pudding, thinking this party is awful anyway, and all he wants is to leave. But why does that wretch Cruel insist on talking to him? He doesn't want to say a word to that man. Then Cruel asks if he's hurt. The protagonist cuts him off, saying he's being annoying today. He can take care of himself, so Cruel doesn't need to pretend to care after all this time. Every time he was injured, he had to act like he was fine, and they can keep their silence between them, just like always. The atmosphere is heavy when Cruel awkwardly starts to say something, but suddenly Stave appears, saying his heart feels warm seeing such brotherly love. The protagonist, however, remembers that this man is the leader of the nobles opposing the Emperor. Cruel greets him politely and Stave says it's all fine. He introduces himself to Dian, saying he's heard much about him and it's a pleasure to meet him. The protagonist just stares at his hand, then turns away. Everyone at the party seems shocked that he ignored a duke. This empire really is full of irritating people. Honestly, it was better back in the demon realm. At least there were interesting people around. Not that he's into lolis. No FBI. Don't do that. The whole party is whispering while Stave stands silently. But DM ignores him, saying he doesn't care about anything. No way was he going to speak while chewing pudding and risk drooling. It would be humiliating. And that explains it. He was acting far too bold for someone usually so foolish. Noticing the Duke is getting angry, he reluctantly decides to give a greeting before things get worse. But just then, the crown prince, likely Eduardo's son, named Elphidus, arrives and calls for the Duke. The protagonist keeps chewing, wondering if he accidentally put honey on himself today because people just won't stop approaching him. Elphidus comments that the place is a mess tonight and Stave apologizes for being there. The prince says there's nothing to worry about, it's all fine, and that it's his own fault they haven't met sooner. But inside, he's questioning why Stave is talking to Dion. He couldn't allow that man to carry out whatever plans he had. It looked like he was determined to protect our boy at any cost, and I don't even know why. Then suddenly, someone else comes up and embraces Dion. Finally, a fiery little admirer on this side of the world too, Alicia Desert, who says she's missed our boy so much. But then everyone turns in shock, because that hug of hers makes him cough up a whole pool of blood. Now people are calling for doctors. Our guy had just taken critical damage. Could it be her embrace was that powerful? Normally, you'd expect airbags to soften the impact, not make it worse. Lime quickly covers his mouth, telling him not to speak so the bleeding won't get worse when the Emperor appears with the first hero at his side and also a general known as Nemesis. Seriously, their names, Nemesis, Cruel, it's like everyone's branded evil from birth. Alicia, meanwhile, is a wreck, apologizing, saying it was her fault for not being able to control her strength. Her brother also apologizes, but the Emperor waves it off, saying there's no way a great hero like Dion would be bleeding just from a hug. Clearly, he was already wounded. He must have been attacked on the way and is carrying internal injuries. The protagonist, though, is confused by all of this. So many people suddenly appearing, talking about him, fussing around him, while all he wants is to be quiet and leave. The Emperor suggests he see a doctor, but Dion insists he's fine. Soon after, others begin whispering that maybe his weakness is because of the Demon King's curse. For our boy, that's perfect. That's exactly what he wants them to believe. He asks to be excused and says he's leaving. From what I can gather, he went mad back then. And from that madness, he created this good personality to cover up the darker one. At least that's what it feels like. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, that's the kind of story this is, where we're left guessing at every turn. But just as he's asking to be excused, he stumbles and nearly faints, only to have Cruel grab him by the arm. Damn it, where's a beautiful woman when he needs one? Instead, Cruel earns himself a slap. Dion shoves him away, telling him to back off and that he doesn't need his help. During 8 long years on the battlefield, he hated this man with every fiber of his being. So why did this bastard have the audacity to pretend he cared now? The Emperor steps in, telling him to calm down, saying he's clearly unwell and that going home really is the best option. The protagonist realizes this is basically a polite way of being kicked out. Normally, he'd see it as an insult, but with how awful this place feels, he just bows out. He leaves through the door and silence fills the hall. Steve, though, keeps staring at Cruel, and I still can't figure out why he even likes the protagonist when he knows full well Dion killed their parents. He caught him in the act. But then again, maybe it's no coincidence his name is Cruel. Outside, Steve tells Cruel that his younger brother treated him with blatant disrespect. And even after all the chaos Dion caused, the Emperor didn't punish him. Not only that, Cruel himself seems strangely lenient with the boy. Cruel replies that he didn't want to ruin the atmosphere. But Steve cuts in, saying Cruel is misunderstanding. He knew exactly what state of mind he was in when he came to that conversation. Then we see Cruel that actually asked Steve to sponsor him. Right in front of him, Steve saw a man who had lost both family and home at the hands of his younger brother. Cruel swore that if Steve became his patron, he would be the best sword Steve could ever wield. Steve knew there were other ways the man could survive, other paths he could take, but he replied fine. He wasn't foolish enough to kick aside a dog eager to serve a master. Still, he wanted to know why Cruel had made that request. Cruel answered that this time he wanted to be the protector. Steve admitted he'd never understood why Cruel wanted to take that role, but now he realized Cruel wasn't protecting someone else. He was trying to protect himself. Was he afraid of Dion? Cruel lowered his head and said yes. And Steve says that both of them are on the same path, eliminating the Emperor's dog. With his hand over his chest, Steve thinks this is absolutely crucial. The tightening in his heart tells him that man is a threat to everything, and he swears that one day he will kill him. Outside the carriage, Lion asks if Dion needs help, but he replies that he's fine. That is, until he looks ahead and sees the entire entrance of the house completely destroyed and burning. On top of that, why were the death knights there too? He imagines it must be a dream, some kind of hallucination. His stress had reached its breaking point, but reality sets in quickly when he feels the heat on his skin, and he demands to know what disaster is happening here. The soldiers call him captain, but another corrects them, saying he's now a count. They can't call him captain anymore. He's about to ask why the place is such a mess when suddenly a bomb falls right into his hand. Completely confused, he hears Lion tell him to be careful. He throws it aside and it explodes in another part of the garden. He demands to know why these damn bastards are doing this. Lean asks if he's alright, the soldiers are all worried, and then someone comes walking out from the flames. A man steps out of the fire and says the cursed one really is a hero. He had caught Dion off guard, but Dion had thrown the bomb at the perfect spot, killing him instantly. The army men are amazed that he had already arrived and killed one of them, while the protagonist hadn't even realized there were intruders. It's then he realizes another attack has been launched by the Revolutionary Army. His comrades explain that those men came to destroy his home, so they rushed over to deal with it. The protagonist, however, wants to know why everyone else is there. The soldiers are confused, hadn't they just explained? But Dion is convinced that if they're running around following him, it must mean they got themselves into trouble and lost their positions. The men, though, seem touched, saying the captain doesn't really care about them. Sure, they had their issues, but not enough to get expelled. He tells them to stop disrespecting him, while he tries to step away. Honestly, this boy's life isn't easy. Wherever he goes, people just keep bothering him. What he has to focus on now is that the army not only attacked his carriage, but also tried to ambush him at his own home. They were clearly determined to kill him. He notices one Revolutionary Army survivor suddenly get up and try to run. The protagonist needs information and has to capture at least one of them. That's when the butler, remember, appears, slamming one man to the ground and lifting the other, saying they barely escaped. Clearly, this wasn't an ordinary butler. He tells Dion he's impressed with him, that he thought something terrible would happen after hearing about the carriage attack. He also asks if anything happened at the palace, since Dion looks far more troubled than when he left. When Dion tries to say something, someone else cuts in, reminding everyone that they have been attacked by the Revolutionary Army, and of course he's shaken. Finally, Remember tells him to go upstairs and rest, while Dion watches the captured man in the background. That prisoner swears that one day Dion Hart will die. Well, unless he's immortal, that's a vow anyone could make. There were 3 people standing in the way of removing the Emperor from power: Commander Nemesius, Chancellor Ardal, and without a doubt, Dion Hart, the spearhead of the army, the one who had most influenced the 8-Year War. On top of that, everything he did was done in secret, making it impossible to predict his movements. People claim he went out to hunt monsters, but he knew it was always for some other mission. One of them starts to say something about Dion being nothing but a dog of the army, but another man grabs him by the collar and tells him to shut his mouth. It was because they fought against the Emperor that they had to endure that war in the first place. The man tries to argue, but without much discussion, the other one pulls out a knife, says Dion needs to rest, and ends it right there. He's dead. Watching this, the butler only thinks about how hard it'll be to clean up this mess today. The next chapter opens in an empty, impoverished city. A girl starving remembers she hasn't eaten anything since that day. But in that slum, crying won't put food on her plate. Just then, a friend shows up and says he managed to get a piece of bread. It came from the Church of Salvation, which sometimes hands out water and even a few other things for free. The girl insists that's impossible. There must be drugs or something wrong with it. He tells her to stop being ridiculous. The crippled man from the house next door ate some and said he felt fine. She argues that man would eat anything even if it had drugs in it. He tells her to stop doubting so much. They gave it to him after he explained she'd been starving for a week. He tries to take it back when she refuses, but she snatches it away. Still, she wonders why anyone would give away food and water without asking for anything in return. The boy then stands up and declares that since she doesn't trust it, he'll go back and bring even more bread. In his mind, it doesn't matter if they put poison in it. Well, that's one way to die, right, kid? But anyway, the girl stands, calls out to Paul, and says she'll go with him. If what he said is true and people are really giving out food, then it's the only way they can survive. Back at the castle, a week has passed since Dion returned to the Empire. The place has already been restored, and now the Death Knights, whom he calls the Mad Dogs, are going to work with him for a while. Unexpected, and he has no idea why. His plan had been to take advantage of his time in the human kingdom, since the Emperor hadn't summoned him, but now he's drowning in paperwork from being away too long. The protagonist demands to know which idiot approved the disaster of a damn project that will waste time and money to build. Remember calmly answers that it was him. Instantly, Dion changes tone, agreeing it's a brilliant idea and approves it. Ever since he saw Remember kill those men, he decided it was better not to cross him too much. It's better to leave him in charge of these things anyway. Then he hears shouting and looks out the window. A fight is breaking out. The Mad Dogs, his white-clad troop, against Imperial soldiers, the same ones who are always causing trouble. Our boy asks if these troublesome knights have nothing better to do. The butler explains that the Emperor always gave them missions, but now that they're under Dion's command and he hasn't assigned anything, they've just been training aimlessly and starting trouble. The protagonist doesn't want to have to command these men, but Remember tells him it's obvious he received them because His Majesty cares deeply about him. The Emperor would never risk placing such a powerful troop in a distant house, since that could easily lead to betrayal. This was proof of the trust and regard he held for Dion. But Dion is sure the Emperor sent those bastards back because he realized how impossible they are to manage. He also wants to know why there's so much paperwork to deal with. He had handed over Heart territory to the Emperor a while ago. If that man really cared about him, he should be taking care of this land himself and leave Dion with empty hands. That's when Remember reveals that apparently Dion didn't know, but for some time now, His Majesty had officially named him the sole ruler of the Heart Empire. The protagonist is shaken, demanding to know why the cursed emperor did this, while Remember warns him that the official announcement should be arriving soon. Dion immediately gets up. He wants a way to return this house. When he first received the title of Count, he had already wanted to refuse it because he didn't want to serve as a Margrave. From the explanation here, a Margrave is basically a count whose land borders another country, but he's treated like a Marquis. From what I understand, it just means you're stuck right next to the enemy. And the reason our protagonist doesn't want this land is obvious. He has no good memories of this place. In fact, his worst ones are tied to it. So he says he won't accept it. He'll speak with the Emperor and hand everything back. But then someone announces that the Crown Prince and General Nemesis are here to see him. Obviously, Dion has no idea why those two want to talk to him. Nemesis hates him, so why would he show up? The general stands in the middle of the room staring at the Rit painting and wonders if the boy really wanted to bring that thing along when building his new mansion. Someone greets them, and Elphidius immediately apologizes for the sudden visit, but he needs a word with the Count. We then see a little earlier, Alitia was upset upon hearing that our boy's house had been attacked. At least he's got a cute admirer in this place. But her brother tells her not to be so downhearted. She, however, puts her hand over her face and says she knows he'll never want to see her again. All the hard work she put in has been wasted. She stands up and tells her brother to admit she's beautiful. She knows she's a princess and can never make the first move. Maybe she's not all that talented, but she didn't want to cause problems either. Clearly, she's trying to win Dion over. Elphidius tells her once again it's not her fault, even though she really did hit the boy with full force. She says she'll apologize, and he asks if she's planning to go see him. When she nods, he immediately says no. Normally, he lets her do whatever she wants, but this time the situation is completely different. If she went to him or if he came to see her, it would all spiral into a scandal. The eccentric girl replies that it would only make it easier for them to marry, but he cuts her off. He knows that everyone thinks of her as innocent and foolish, and that's exactly the image she maintains. Then, with a darker look on her face, she says yes, it's true she doesn't love him, but it would be easy to make him useful to everyone. Another twisted one. Can't they let the boy live peacefully? No wonder she's messed up with two personalities. Elphidius warns her that if she shows that much audacity, no one will believe she's the sweet, harmless princess anymore. If she wants to lose that title, he doesn't care. But she says no. She would rather do everything possible to avoid giving the nobles any chance to fight harder for the throne. Besides, all the work she's done toward winning over the Count wasn't wasted. She made her intentions clear, and now everyone knows it, which means no other girl will try to get close to him. If that's what it takes to keep someone as talented as him loyal to the Emperor, she accepts it. Her brother strokes her head and says she's a thoughtful girl. He knows she has her reasons for everything she does, but he's told her countless times that she can stop whenever she wants. While she smiles sweetly and says she understands, it's obvious she's hiding something darker. She then asks her brother to find out what Dion thinks of her because she doesn't want the Empire's treasure to stay angry about what she did. And now we're there in the meeting, right? Clearly, it's not the most important thing in the world, but he needed to make sure the boy stayed on the Emperor's side. Meanwhile, the protagonist is wondering what the hell those two guys are doing there. We see that he welcomed them politely, and Elphidius said it was fine, he could sit down. Right away, our boy wanted to know the reason for the visit, and the blonde one said he had something to say, same as the general, but it would be quick. The two exchanged glares, and our protagonist didn't look too thrilled. That Lemetic was staring at him like he could burn a hole through him. But our boy knew that when the prince said it wasn't a big deal, it always meant trouble. Elphidius then brought up that incident at the celebration when Alitia crossed the line with him. He remembered spitting blood, said it was fine, and the guy thanked him for not taking it as an insult. Even though that moment caught the protagonist off guard, he knew she was kind of showing affection, so he didn't mind much. That's when Elphidius said he had a personal favor to ask. The protagonist hesitated, and the guy went on. If it was alright, he wanted them to be friends. Poor protagonist. Dude's coming at him with the fakest smile, and our boy's too soft-hearted. He said he wanted to get to know the best of Lord Dion, but since he was so busy, they barely had a chance to meet. The protagonist was a bit confused, wondering if that was really the reason he came. To which Elphidius answered that being the crown prince meant there were a lot of things he couldn't do, including visiting someone he wanted to call a friend. And that's why he used the celebration incident as an excuse to come and talk, playing the whole, oh, I'm so cute and friendly act, but deep down, he's a bastard. Dion said he was extremely grateful for the offer, but before he could finish, the general was already giving him that piercing stare. So he responded that it would be an honor to be friends with a great prince. Elphidius lit up right away, saying from now on they were friends and they'd be closer. He was overjoyed. Dion, though, wasn't exactly thrilled. Obviously, Elphidius wasn't an idiot and could tell the boy was uncomfortable. He probably only accepted out of sympathy, just like the rumors said. And he took advantage of that, quickly adding more, saying soon he'd come over so they could train together and then have some tea. The protagonist was already about to refuse, but the prince stood up, saying he had plenty to do and was decided. Goodbye. Off he went, excited to see his new buddy soon. The protagonist, however, didn't want to be left alone in that room with Nemesis, who at that moment addressed him as the honorary Count Dion Hart and said it had been a while since they spoke alone. The protagonist was about to say something, but Nemesis cut him off, saying he'd get straight to the point so he could leave. The Emperor wanted him to hand over that revolutionary soldier he captured. The goal was to find the base of those guys and wipe them out once and for all. But since Dion and his troops were the ones who had caught him, he had the right to refuse. The protagonist mentally thanked him for getting straight to the point and said he didn't care, he'd hand over the man, just go ahead. Then, in front of his cell, it brought out a prisoner. The protagonist pointed and said that was the one. But Nemesis said he had heard that Dion was attacked by 3 people. One died in an explosion, but the other's death hadn't been confirmed. The protagonist wanted to know why he was asking that. Nemesis told him to explain how the last one died. Nemesis then thought to himself that he never hated people without reason. During the 8-year war, he'd seen up close the drastic change in Dion's personality. The boy had been the first noble to become just a common soldier, so it was impossible not to notice. At first he was fragile, barely surviving the early fights, and in the end he adopted cruelty as his method of survival. That made him start killing all his enemies in a brutal way, and for sure, it's one of the reasons that ended up driving him insane. He puts his hands on his shoulder and tells him to get up, that he's been standing there for 3 days already. It wasn't his fault for doing what he did to survive, but he has to accept the results. Nemesis realized that guilt was eating away at that child little by little, battle after battle. But then the boy lifts his face and asks what he's even talking about. Right then, the general noticed he had some kind of nature, a split purity or another personality. Dion says his wounds are fine and the general wants to talk about the battle. But Dion looks him straight in the eye again and says he really has no idea what he's talking about. Nemesis realized he had this bloodthirsty personality that only cared about survival and another one that was normal, one that always forgot the horrors he had committed. Dion with that sinister look, and we already know that when he's got those dark circles under his eyes, he's clearly possessed. But even so, he says he's too tired to remember what happened. Still, he was lucky to survive without having to kill anyone. For the general, the boy couldn't handle the weight of his own actions and ran away from the results in the most extreme and worst possible way. Then back in the present, he asks if he remembers how the guy died, all while wondering how long he's going to keep playing dumb. Dion then asks what he means by remember. The general thinks that maybe if he started to take responsibility, things might change. But Dion says that unfortunately he wasn't there, so he doesn't know any details. Looks like some dogs attacked him. Right away, the guy realizes he's being an idiot for thinking anything would be different. So he says he's leaving and that there's no need to follow him. Obviously, he knows that whole dog attack story is ridiculous. He has no doubt Dion killed the soldier and probably used that strange personality of his to conveniently do whatever he wanted. Weakness in someone with great responsibility was catastrophic. To him, the boy was an absolute threat. So why does His Majesty keep him close? Not only him, but even the Demon King seem to know too. There are so many pieces moving here, I'm trying to connect them. Then the protagonist is back, saying he just dozed off. He asks how long he was out, and Remember says not long. But he wants to know if the boy's feeling better because he got really worried when he fainted. Even though his body is naturally fragile, it's dangerous for him to keep stressing himself like that. The protagonist answers that he's fine. He just needs some rest. But then Remember says maybe it'd be good to send those crazy mutts on a monster hunt. The protagonist thinks that's not a bad idea since those guys have been causing tons of problems. And Remember mentions there are some monsters roaming around the borders and it'd be perfect. Our boy smiles, saying yes, and inside he's really excited. Getting those guys away from him would be perfect. Lean is already waving goodbye, saying they'll see each other at the border then. Oh no, I thought he'd stay in the castle. But in the end, he got sent along too. Actually, she's saying they're already arriving at the border. Our boy wants to know why he has to be there too. And they answer it so he doesn't miss out on the fun of the hunt, obviously. But the protagonist wonders who in their right mind would miss seeing blood. He tried his best not to go, but they kept clinging to his leg and begging. Everyone saying he couldn't let only them have all the fun. They promised they'd help him get as many kills as possible. Our boy tried saying he had something to take care of back at the castle, but Remember showed up telling him not to worry, that he'd handle everything like always and that he could just go relax this week. The soldiers got all emotional in his kindness, right? And our boy tried saying, "Hey, Remember, you bastard, I don't want to go." But then the butler explained that if he went, those rats would try to follow them anyway. This way, it'd be even easier to kill whoever was coming after him. In other words, it was the perfect vacation, and at the same time, it solved one of his problems. Considering everything going on, he couldn't really say no. Besides, if he stayed behind being hunted by everyone, there was the real risk of him actually dying. Then one of the army guys told him to cheer up, that he'd heard when he came back from the last hunt. He had a huge grin on his face. Dion, though, thinks that grin was only because he was just chilling out with the demons. And now, a bunch of orcs and shamans are already showing up, and the army guys are all excited, saying it's time to take care of business. The protagonist, on the other hand, is already missing the demon realm. Then he notices the beauty of the house sighing and realizes even she's tired of this. When he asked for someone to control the Death Knights, she was the first to be appointed. Unlike all these lunatics, she's the personification of what a warrior should be. She asks him if he's not going to join in, but he just answers that he'll let them enjoy themselves for now. He's fine staying calm. And the guys are really arguing over who's killing more than the other. They keep offering it up to our boy, but he just tells them to go on and keep having fun. That's because he had the feeling that if he joined in, something would break. But suddenly, he feels something and bam, an arrow strikes him right in the shoulder. Lion screams for him, but all he can think is that if he hadn't turned his head, that arrow would have ripped through his neck. But who would stage such a crazy ambush? Unless it was someone who wanted to start a war with the Empire. Nobody would dare. It had to be some assassin from another group that wanted him dead. From the corner, you could see, hidden among the bushes, a guy drawing another arrow, wondering how he managed to dodge. At that point, Dion says he's tired of these guys. He tells her to cut the arrow, and she obeys immediately. But she knows that any move he makes is going to cause extreme pain and push that thing deeper into his arm. The protagonist, though, just calls the dogs and orders everyone to use the drugs. From above, someone watches the battle, asking if that down there wasn't the Empire's hero, Dion Hart. Another one next to him says yes, that's the white-haired kid who commands everyone. The guy looks worried, wondering if this was some kind of internal conflict or what's going on. But then seeing he's injured, he says it's been 2 years since the 8-year war. The infamous Dion Hart got hurt, and for sure the Empire wouldn't want a new war at this moment. All they had to do was finish them off here and claim they were attacked without provocation, and they might even get compensation. Down below, though, the guys are all consuming some kind of pill, and Lion wants to know what it is. He tells her it's that thing that makes your reason freeze, and she comments that it's dangerous and had been banned. But it's not like Dion, who slices through everyone, cares about that. The guys hiding raise their swords and charge for the attack. But Dion just jumps off his horse and says, "Here goes the first one." And with that, the guy's body is already drenched in blood. He warns the guy to stay still unless he wants both his legs cut off. Then he tells the army that one's captured, and now the rest can be killed. With that, the whole troop advances, and the enemies are completely wiped out. He tells Lion to keep an eye on the fallen one and not let him escape. But at that moment, he sees some of the soldiers hesitating to give the final slash on the guy. That's because the rest were already dead, and this one, looked like he was going to die anyway. But then Dia moves in, slashes the guy about 50 times, and says they've been fighting for 8 years like dogs. So why did they suddenly think they could go back to being human? In reality, they were still pathetic and didn't have the slightest chance of surviving. He had already taught countless times that you can't show mercy. Everything they do is for the sake of survival. The guys who attack realized they had made a mistake. They were definitely shredded because the scene shifts to Cruel. The butler is asking why he gave half the reward just because they got a wound. The Duke had already made his intentions very clear. Cruel answers that he knows the intention was to kill. He only added one condition, so it's fine. The butler insists, saying that Dion had to be killed, so why did he use their money for a condition like that? Cruel answers that he takes the responsibility and there's nothing to worry about. The man is wondering why the person who should hate Dion more than anyone is acting like that. That wouldn't make any sense at all. Meanwhile, Cruel thinks that if someone is going to decide the end of that kid, it's going to be him. In other words, he's protecting him because he wants to be the one who kills Dion. Apparently, the Count made an offer, and he kind of made a secret deal to get half the reward just for causing an injury. On the battlefield, however, the protagonist is there cutting everyone down, while someone nearby says this is the worst scene he has ever made. The man with red eyes didn't look in any way like a hero of the Empire. That wasn't what they were being paid for. And now was explained why that group of knights had that name. It was clear they weren't human, but demons. To be honest, in this story here, the demons are the good guys. And then Dion approaches and asks if the guy is desperate for money, stupid, or both, stabbing a knife in and stomping. He then says he doesn't like torturing for hours and hours, so how about he just says right away who sent him to do this, and they can settle everything. The scene shifts to someone informing the Emperor that the Kingdom of Arion sent a complaint because the Dions had gone hunting near their border. Apparently, the troops were forced to retaliate, and now their kingdom is claiming this is a military invasion. The Emperor, however, only wants to know if the boy was ambushed. Is he alright? The man explains that he's alive, but took an arrow in the shoulder and won't be able to fight properly for a month. The Emperor asks if those bastards are asking for compensation, and he says yes. Right away, he knows. These guys think that because they injured Dion, they wouldn't dare to start a war. It was a shame they were as stupid as they were weak. Apparently, he has been going easy these last years. The informant is desperate, saying they can just claim that it was them who orchestrated this ambush instead of starting something. But Eduardo just orders them to prepare for war. Of course, the two are already startled and beg him to reconsider. It's been 2 years since an 8-year war ended. Nobody wants to fight again. They were broke. But the Emperor says that as they conquer everything, the money will come. If they fought an 8-year war, there's no reason they can't do another. The Chancellor says the troops aren't prepared and the people won't want this, but he just warns them that he's a tyrant. He had already been planning to conquer the rest of the continent, and the timing is perfect. The moment he killed all of his brothers and sisters, he had already decided he was going to follow this path. He's not willing to go back, even though this has now become a shackle. That chain right now is calling for another catastrophe. The Chancellor is just standing there, thinking there's nothing wrong with someone wanting to fulfill the responsibilities they set for themselves, but clearly, this guy's priorities were pathetic. All he prays for is that, if those catastrophes really happen, the Empire won't be affected. The Chancellor leaves, and right away the Emperor asks Nemesis if he knows about the Church of Salvation. The guy says, isn't that the cult that's been getting an absurd amount of followers from the slums lately? He understands that it's almost natural, since people in this country in times of hardship want to rely on religion. The Emperor agrees, but says those people have gotten way too big, and it would be best to wipe out all that power before a war even starts. He wonders if it wouldn't be good to put Dion in charge of dealing with this as punishment for the problem he caused. Even with his injured arm, taking down the cult would be easy, but Nemesis immediately refuses, saying the boy is way too dangerous. Eduardo wants to know if he hates him so much because he's unnecessarily brutal. Nemesis answers that's not even the problem. It's the way he tries to survive. The boy had two personalities and his mental strength was as fragile as a sandcastle. The worst thing would be putting him in a situation where he could break completely. But the Emperor just laughs and says he already knows that very well. Obviously, the commander wants to know why then. The man replies that it's Dion's fault. If he does something, he'll also be responsible for it. Nemesis insists, saying a broken sword eventually hurts the master. He shares responsibility for what the boy does. But Eduardo doesn't care and says it doesn't matter. All of this is part of an emperor's life, and he tells the man to stop because that's enough. He's already taken on the role of a tyrant, but from time to time he is a good leader to the people he likes, and it's only because of that he's letting this insolence slide this time. He's not going to punish one of his subordinates over something so trivial. Yeah, Nemesis already felt the threat, right? And he apologized. Then the Emperor tells him to relax. He wouldn't keep someone so dangerous at his side without a good reason. After that, we see in the past Dion asking permission to wipe out his family. In that moment, the Emperor clearly felt the hatred and rage of that boy. Someone with extreme talent, but who was thrown into war at 14 years old, not knowing a single thing and spent 8 years in it. The moment he returned from the battlefield after everything, that was his very first request. The Emperor replied that the Hearts hated him for having seized the throne by force, so he had no reason to say no. But he asked if the boy thought he was strong enough for the downfall of such a prestigious family. At that moment, the Emperor had decided to use him as a sword that needed to be forged. Dion only wanted to know what he had to do. And that's when Eduardo mentioned the hero was going on a mission to kill the Demon King and asked why he wouldn't join him. To him, the plan was perfect, and with the warrior's death, the result was a success. He came back with that man's body, and the Emperor told him it was splendid work. He asked if he hadn't changed his mind, but Dion replied he hadn't. In the end, the Emperor couldn't deny that he was a hero, even without that so-called fragment. At that moment, he commented that maybe the Heart Mansion wouldn't remain silent tonight. And yeah, the protagonist just thanked him. That was how the cruelty began. But the story says that fate is something mysterious, and when Cruel came back later that night, he saw the scene of Dion having killed everyone in the house. And the worst part of all is that he survived. The Emperor comments that in the end, Cruel became a great way to keep Dion in his place. Because like that, Dion killed the family without the Emperor ever giving an order, right? He only authorized it. But Cruel was left alive, and if Dion wants to kill his older brother, he'll need the Emperor's help. On the other hand, Cruel is working for that Duke, which is his only way of surviving. Both of them became each other's leash. As long as Cruel is alive, Dion will stay by his side. Honestly, I think that pretty soon the boy's going to kill you too, but whatever. Next chapter, our boy is being pulled around by bodies on all sides, wondering what this is. A voice tells him to let the madness take over, saying that everything they do is for survival. The protagonist covers his ears, trying to calm himself, but then the shadow comes from behind, covers his face, and tells him not to think about it. He had to accept that in the end, he was ignored by his family, even though he was always there. Suddenly, he wakes up, asking himself if it was just another one of those dreams. His arm was still injured, and he remembers the arrow he took. The problem is that after that, at the border, he doesn't really know much of what happened. One of the army guys then says that he arrived at the mansion, and he gets down. I still think it's funny. This is one of the few stories where the protagonist leaves, goes away, and comes back within like 1 or 2 chapters. In others, the characters leave and don't return for 10. And now Dion is thinking that if it weren't for that weird dream, he believed nothing happened. But well, he's still carrying that injured shoulder. Then he asks about Remember, who shows up right away saying, who would have thought they had a spy there all this time? Man, one guy was about to hit the ground, tried to say something, and got stabbed just like that, dead on the spot. Remember says now they'll work for the dead. Someone comes to take the body away and already warns that Dion had returned. Remember says fine, he'll receive the boy and ask them to find out who that guy was working for. Wait, but the guy's dead. Are they pulling information out of corpses now? How are they going to figure that out? Then we see Remember talking to our boy, noticing he was injured, asking if he's alright. The protagonist replies it's not much of a problem, and Remember says he knows he fights with his right hand, so of course he'll be able to keep on fighting. Then he mentions it smells strange because he just killed one of the spies, right? And his body's covered in blood. He tried to capture him alive, but there was a small incident. Yeah, right. Yoon remember isn't any good. He's pretending it was just a small incident when clearly the guy was pinned down on the ground. Our boy really gets no peace, literally nowhere he goes, my god. Then the butler asks if he figured out who attacked him, and Dion says the people just died, so he didn't have the chance to find out. Plus, he doesn't remember anything anyway. The butler says that by the looks of it, whoever's behind this can't be underestimated. And on top of that, he thinks Duke Lester seems like one of the most likely culprits. Wait, now he's giving information that actually sounds logical. I'm confused. Either way, Dion wouldn't be able to handle this alone, and it'd be best to ask His Majesty for help. As soon as he says that, he also apologizes for interfering too much. Dion says it's fine, while thinking he was planning on visiting the Emperor anyway, to talk about handing over this empire he doesn't even want. His plan is to settle things quickly and finally live the peaceful life he's been dreaming of for so long. But then when our boy arrives, he finds out that Duke Lester, yeah, that damn Steve, is having a meeting with His Majesty. He says it's fine, but he's clearly confused. He came to talk exactly about this guy, so what's he doing there? Right then, that fake Lydia shows up with her dumb face all emotional, calling our boy. Her brother holds her, greets his friend, and our boy returns the greeting. The shady one obviously shows up all glowing, saying they're friends. And I'd like to believe this guy is good, but of course I don't trust him. Everyone in this story is rotten. Then Elphidus says they can wait to speak with His Majesty, and now they're suddenly all at a table with that clingy girl hanging onto his arm. Get off, woman. And the protagonist is not happy at all. If he knew he'd run into those two at this time, he never would have come. Then the guy comments that he drinks a lot of tea, and if he wants, he'll bring him some when he leaves. He replies it's not necessary, but then Alitia shoves her cookie in his mouth. Forceful girl, huh? Then the prince also tells him to be more careful. He heard Dion went out on that hunt and wrecked his body. The protagonist says it's fine, and then Elphidus tells him to take better care of himself because he doesn't want to be emperor, which means the one who's there now has to stay alive for a long time. The protagonist is coughing deep inside since his plan is to stop serving this guy and disappear from this place as soon as possible. Elphidus explains that if he takes the throne, it means something happened to Eduardo, and that's why he has no intention of it. And as he must know, His Majesty is like a brother to them, and they want him to be happy. Wait, what? I thought you were his sons. You're all thick-headed liars exactly alike. Ah, now the protagonist clears it up. It's impressive how much the prince and princess adore their uncle, the emperor. Then Dion explains how strange that it is because the man who's now the emperor used to be the ninth prince. He didn't just kill his brothers, he killed his parents, the children of his parents, the brothers of the children of the cousins. The guy wiped out everyone. But he left those two alive, and what's even worse, they actually like him and care about him. He then talks about the first prince, who is Elphidus and Aletia's father. Unlike the rest of the royal family, he was good-natured, a decent man. He took care of the ninth prince together with his own kids up until the day he died. So it seems he forgave him, right? Since they were basically like brothers because his father raised that bastard. What a beautiful family. Hard to believe they'd go on to massacre everybody later. Dion says that if the first prince had lived, the ninth wouldn't have had to resort to violence like that. Then Elphidus is holding the hand of that fake and tells our boy that they're counting on him, while she asks not to put too much pressure on the guy. The protagonist just says he's going to the bathroom and leaves. Fake number 1 comments that he ran away, and fake number 2 says yes. Clearly the talk was a bit too much for him. Elphidus feels bad because he was being sincere. He knows that no matter how calm the emperor looks, there's still a sword pointed at his throat. We hear someone shouting that at this rate, that person would stay on the throne forever. They needed to settle this quickly because most nobles were tired and justice had to be brought. For 2 years, words like this have been directed at Elphidus. He ignores it, but clearly it's just building up into a threat. Right then, Alitia says the emperor needs someone completely on his side. Dion is extremely talented, so it's a blessing to have him close, and that's why she's working hard to seduce him. But like those tiny letters in a contract, she adds, "Don't get me wrong, I like him too." Really? I don't buy it. Elphidus says it would be perfect if he became a beast loyal to His Majesty, to the point that even if a noble raised a sword toward the emperor, Dion wouldn't hesitate to kill him. Honestly, hesitating to kill doesn't really sound like Dion's problem. Our silver-haired guy is wandering through the castle looking for the bathroom when suddenly someone opens a door. He recognizes the man, who's startled. He approaches, trying to figure out why this guy looks so frightened and stares at him, wanting to know if he happens to know where they are. The man suddenly pulls a sword and tries to attack him out of nowhere. The protagonist raises his arm and takes a cut while still trying to understand why this weirdo is attacking him when all he wants is directions to the bathroom. Turns out the guy on the ground had been stealing documents and thought the protagonist caught him red-handed. What he can't believe is that he was unlucky enough to run into Dion Hart of all people. Then someone grabs him by the neck and lifts him up. Yep, it's cruel. Could it be an Itachi situation here? Like they killed their parents because they needed to survive, and then he helps the demon king, Cruel helps the king. Maybe this is some fourth dimension chess going on? Just crossed my mind. The protagonist asks what Cruel is doing there, and Cruel glares back, also wanting to know what he's doing there. Seeing his injured arm, Cruel starts choking the guy even harder, who begs not to be strangled. A few sheets fall to the floor, and when Dion bends to pick them up, that bastard Duke Stave shows up to take a look. He comments that they seem to be pretty important documents. He asks if Dion's there to see the Emperor, and the protagonist says yes, he just needs a little chat. Stave, all crooked-eyed, says the boy managed to catch an infiltrator. For sure, His Majesty will grant him any request. After all, even though Cruel had lifted the man up, he was sure the boy would have handled it on his own. At that moment, the bunch of blockheads showed up worried, calling out for Dion. Elphidius immediately grabbed him, wanting to know why he was bleeding, same as always from his nose and shoulder, and they were already calling for a doctor. Cruel said it must have been from the fight, and Stave agreed, probably claiming the spy's weapon had been poisoned. The protagonist, however, didn't want anyone to figure out that this was just his own body being weak as hell. But right then, a man came running in, all desperate, saying he'd heard there was a patient. As soon as he saw Dion Hart's face, though, he panicked. Every time he had to treat this kid, the nobles all stared him down as if he made a single mistake, he'd be killed. Elphidius immediately asked about poison, but the doctor said it was just a small dagger cut, not even that deep. The prince grabbed him and ordered him to look properly, because Dion was coughing up blood. It clearly wasn't just some scratch. Then someone else appeared and said it was the Demon King's curse. Nemesis came in, and everyone greeted him. So apparently, everybody knew Dion had gone to visit the Demon King, or at least everyone in the castle, right? And in his memory, he'd already said he was there to take Dion to see the Emperor. The protagonist, just wanting to escape the whole scene, said he couldn't keep that man waiting and left, thanking everyone for their concern. Seeing him walk away so casually without worrying made Elphidius believe he didn't care at all about the demon marks, since that was something incurable anyway. Truly, he was a resilient boy who kept everything bottled up inside. At least that part was genuinely true. Outside, Stave climbed into the carriage, and the worst part was that the paper he'd seen was a plan about the war the Emperor was preparing to start. He hadn't imagined that this crazy Emperor would jump straight into another war. He really was slipping. Stave decided he'd give a little help on this part of the plan, just to make sure he could also get what he wanted out of it. Then the Emperor praised Dion for catching the spy and asked if he was hurt, to which he replied no. But the Emperor pointed out he was sweating like crazy. He reminded him that, as one of the Empire's most valuable assets, he didn't need to hide how he felt. The protagonist answered that he'd keep that in mind, but in reality, he was sweating cold because ever since he took that heavy blow earlier, he hadn't said a word. Truth was, he needed the bathroom and still hadn't managed to go. The Emperor then asked why he was there, and as soon as Dion mentioned it was about the Heart territory, the Emperor cut him off, saying that if it was about giving it back, the answer was no. The protagonist was confused. He hadn't even had the chance to say anything yet. When he tried to bring up returning the army, the Emperor said no again. He would keep the troops, and he would keep the castle, and none of it would be handed over to the Emperor. But if Dion handled a little task, he could guarantee another request. On a paper, Dion saw it was about the Church of Salvation. The Emperor explained it was a crazy cult that was growing fast and wanted Dion to take care of it. The protagonist didn't seem interested, until the Emperor mentioned he'd just give the job to Cruel instead, letting him get the wish. At that, Dion stood up and said he'd do it. He realized this damn Emperor always used Cruel as leverage to force him into things he didn't want to do. But then the Emperor added that he and Cruel would both take on the task, and whoever finished first would be granted the wish. That was the competition. Dion stood up dead serious, saying the job would be finished faster than he thought. No way was he going to lose to that bastard Cruel. And yeah, I guess my fourth dimension chess idea was way off. Forget it. A while later, our boy was drinking tea, saying it had been tasting the same lately, because Remember told him it was the prince himself who sent it, saying he liked it a lot. On top of that, he had to take that awful medicine the doctor gave him. They were in the middle of that conversation when Lion walked in, and the protagonist asked if she had finished investigating the Church of Salvation. She handed him a paper, saying it was the summary, but basically, they were handing out free bread and water without asking for anything in return. And unlike other cults, this one didn't seem to have blind faith in a single leader. All they asked was for people to believe that salvation was coming. The protagonist found it even stranger. Giving away food like that wasn't cheap, and they'd need support from nobles for something like this to work. But these people didn't want money, and they didn't even have a religious leader, so what exactly were they after? Since he was drinking tea non-stop, he stood up to go to the bathroom. But Lion immediately asked if he was going to handle this personally. She told him straight out it was going to be very dangerous, and that they would go together. The poor guy had no idea what she was talking about, but then suddenly, they were already standing in front of what was supposed to be the Church of Salvation. She pulled out an outfit and told him to put on a disguise, because from here on out things would get dangerous. The protagonist couldn't believe that once again he had only wanted to go to the bathroom and somehow ended up dragged somewhere else. He told her he had something to do and warned her not to follow. Apparently, he just wanted to pee right there in the alley. But of course, someone kept following him. And when that girl tried to sneak up from behind, he vanished right in front of her. That way, he relieved himself in the alley, and when he came out all calm, he noticed someone nearby. It was Cruel. When he turned to look back, Dion was startled and spit blood, lowering his head. At first, I thought his brother hadn't seen it, but he immediately launched an attack and Dion blocked it. Cruel remarked that an injured arm wasn't enough to stop him. Diem thought he was talking about the cut from the castle, but then Cruel grabbed his other shoulder, squeezed, and forced him to back away. Right then, the protagonist wanted to know how the hell Cruel knew about the arrow wound, and Cruel said if Diem could still move around that much while injured, and clearly the job hadn't been done properly. That's when Diem realized this guy was the one who had ordered his assassination. But at that moment, Lion appeared behind the alley, and the protagonist grabbed her and pulled her away. She was more worried about him coughing up blood, while Cruel recognized her as the captain of Diem's knights. Diem shielded her, telling her to stay back. Because sure, he could fight with Cruel and maybe nothing would happen. But if she tried to attack the famous hero, things would get messy. Then Cruel asked if he was planning to infiltrate the Church of Salvation. Diem brushed past, saying he didn't have to answer. But his brother warned that he'd be in danger if he dug too deep. Still, of course, Diem wanted to know why the man who had ordered his assassination was suddenly worried about his safety. He really was too much of a gentle brother. Sometime later, while looking at a sheet of paper, Cruel said that if Diem's days were truly numbered, he'd be more concerned with living peacefully. The boy already had a weak body, and the Demon King's curse was still eating away at him. Surely he didn't have much time left. Hold on, now my 4D chess theory actually makes sense. Remember when Cruel tried to save him? Not so sure anymore. Then we see the protagonist throwing mud all over his own face, saying no one could find out they were nobles. Lion, however, hesitated because the smell was horrible, and Dian already knew she would, since she had been born into a noble family. Now that she was the one suffering, he said there was no way the commander was going to abandon him alone, not after she promised she would always be by his side. So she scooped up everything from the ground and smeared it all over her face too. The plan was to get filthy enough to look like poor folks in need of help from the church. And then Diem remembered that Cruel had told him to smear mud in his hair as well. Damn it, it just didn't make any sense. Diem told her to hide her sword and follow him since he'd go in first. Standing in front of the building, there was a green-haired woman he felt like he had seen before. The protagonist walked closer, but then tripped like a complete idiot and went face first into the ground. The woman asked if he was alright and tried to help him up, saying he must be so hungry that he didn't even have the strength to stand. His hand was already full of blood from the constant coughing, and they ended up helping him inside. From a distance, though, he just gave Lion a thumbs up, and she realized his plan was perfect. He really looked like a worn-out beggar. But when she tried to go in, the woman at the entrance told her that they weren't accepting anyone else that day. She handed her bread and water, told her to eat and to come back another time. Lion was about to ask to wait, but it was too late. The woman had already noticed her elegant aura and the way she moved calmly and gracefully. She was clearly some kind of noble or knight that had been sent there. Luckily, our boy had tripped like a fool because the man inside looked so weak and skinny, like he hadn't eaten in days. The woman brought him a cup of tea, convinced there was no way this one came from anywhere but the slums. He thanked her, and she said she'd grab him some food. Meanwhile, Dion was wondering why he hadn't seen anything suspicious at all yet. The place looked like an ordinary temple, the people looked happy, and the guards seemed like perfect paladins. But the fact that everything was so clean, that was the most suspicious thing of all. Then someone asked if he wasn't too hot, and he said no, he preferred keeping the cloak on. Immediately, she said that was all the more reason for him to take it off and pulled down the hood, revealing the curse of white hair and red eyes. The woman seemed startled but touched his face and commented on his red eyes. Strangely enough, he turned it into a little romance moment, saying he knew she wouldn't like them because they were too ugly. Not even his family liked them, so of course strangers would react the same way. She awkwardly replied that they weren't ugly. She asked if he'd ever heard of Dion Hart, someone from the Empire who also had eyes like that. He, playing dumb, asked if that wasn't some hero of the Empire. She said yes, but warned him to be careful. That boy was more like a bloodthirsty vampire than a hero. He thought to himself that his reputation clearly wasn't looking too good. She then asked if he knew what place this was, and he answered that he only knew it was somewhere that gave out bread and water. She confirmed it was the Church of Salvation, a religious organization created to save those suffering because of Eduardo. The Emperor was the reason everyone was living such a miserable life. If he were a good person, nobody would be going through this. The protagonist realized the Emperor was being trashed in this place, and she even commented that he wouldn't have tripped in the muddy streets if the Emperor had fixed everything up and kept it clean. But she reassured him that the Church of Salvation was different from all the others. They didn't believe in money. They only believed in salvation itself. For Diem, that made it even more confusing. It sounded good, but in theory, there had to be some hidden motive behind all this. So if he asked if he became a believer, who exactly would save him? It was time to uncover the truth behind it, but she only said he'd find out once he became one of them. Now he was walking through the church, still unable to find any actual evidence. It didn't seem like the food was poisoned, and everyone looked calm and fine. Then suddenly, someone tapped him on the back, and when he turned, it was a sweet little girl, looked like that one we saw at the very beginning with her brother, wasn't it? She asked if he was new there, and he said yes, only noticing how she seemed cheerful and healthy. She said her name was Thea, and told him he must have been living a hard life to have ended up there, but that he didn't need to worry anymore. This place gave food and drink without asking for anything in return. He thanked her, patted her gently, and said this really was salvation, while noticing several guards around keeping an eye on everything he did. Then a boy in the corner called out to Thea, telling her to hurry and pray, and the protagonist immediately noticed that this other shady kid was glaring at him like he wanted to kill him. The two of them left while Dean tried to figure out how to move without being spotted by the guards. But right then, someone called out to him outside. Lion heard some strange noises. She was looking for a way to sneak in through the back, but wasn't having any luck. Then she saw a few loaves of bread rolling across the ground and someone calling for security. She got closer and saw the green-haired woman saying they had an intruder. If it weren't a hero, everyone there would have been held responsible and replaced. In that moment, Lion thought it was Dion, but maybe it was Cruel. Then someone started tearing things up inside. Turns out it was Lion herself who had rushed in, demanding to know where the Lord was. The protagonist stayed tucked away in a corner, hidden. For a second, he thought he was about to get caught, but thankfully someone else pulled the attention away. A man even offered him more bread. He was the one who had thrown it out the window when she found it outside earlier. After that, Dion wandered into the area where they held prayers. But when he pulled back a curtain and glanced over, the priest was standing there with a green-haired woman. Of course, they immediately asked what was going on, but he had already vanished, and all they saw was the open window. The priest ordered them to clean everything quickly and make sure no one infiltrated the place. The woman, though, seemed to notice something suspicious. And behind the curtain, Cruel suddenly grabbed hold of our boy. "Get off, for God's sake." The protagonist was left wondering why he had to run into this creek yet again. Still, both of them turned their attention to the green-haired woman who was saying it was time to pray for salvation. Everyone there who believed was destined to follow the right path. But instead of leading them in prayer, she wanted to tell them more about what true salvation really was. The crowd got excited, thanking her. She explained they would enter a room that only true believers could listen inside. She pressed against the wall, her arm passing right through, and said that while it looked normal, they could step through it. Then she told everyone to go through the portal, and of course they realized it was some kind of magic. The two little kids were happily skipping in as well, and soon the whole group passed through. Clearly, this church had to be hiding something because they were going way too far to cover up what they were doing. At that point, DM pulled himself free from Cruel. Honestly, he was starting to miss that fake Princess Aletia. They argued for a second, and the next moment they were both touching the wall, trying to figure out how to pass through. The protagonist felt a jewel behind it and realized it was some kind of special magic. This kind of power was something humans had learned during the war against the demons. But unlike the demons, humans couldn't wield special magic easily, so they stored it in crystals like these, which only made it more suspicious. Why would this church have access to such high-level magic? The protagonist was already tempted to give up the mission, but doing that would mean Cruel got the wish. Just then, someone burst through the door saying there was a problem, and Dion quickly hid himself. The man rushed past, saying he had to inform Selin immediately. He ran up to the jewel, called her name, and warned that there was an intruder, someone tearing through the place and shouting for the Lord. The protagonist had no idea what was going on, but then something on the man's back shattered again. Lion arrived, demanding to know where he was. She grabbed the guy, wanting to know who exactly this lord of his was supposed to be. At that moment, Lion was thinking she couldn't reveal which side she belonged to or anything like that. But she also couldn't use the words count or hero, or it would be too obvious. So she just said that her lord was her lord. The man pressed for a name, saying it would help him find the person if she told him who it was. Of course, she kept hesitating, while Dean noticed that the connection with the crystal was still active. On the other side, Salem was listening, and the moment she heard the voice, she recognized it. It was that suspicious mate who had been at the gate earlier, and now she was here asking about the Lord. Not to mention that a strange red-eyed person was in the building. She was now certain it was Dion Hart himself. She had figured the Emperor would give him the mission too, but she didn't expect him to actually show up alone. Meanwhile, as we already guessed, Cruel was there calmly chatting with Salem, asking how she had managed to get inside. He needed to know she wouldn't help him, especially since she knew he was there for some test ordered by the Duke, and besides, he had already received the most crucial information. Then I remembered where I'd seen her, by Stave's side, which meant Cruel was just playing around there. She left the room saying it was a favor, since they worked for the same master. But she also said she'd strengthen the security to make sure Dion Hart wouldn't make it in. What she never expected was that the boy would casually stroll through the front door. She returned to the pulpit, apologized for the interruption, and said it was time to resume the prayers. At the same time, she prayed that cursed Dion Hart wouldn't enter and ruin the work. Everything had to go according to that person's plans. Lion was busy beating people up, but it looked like nobody had any real information. At that moment, the protagonist showed up, called her, and told her to stop causing chaos, saying they should leave first and sort things out later. But she was crouched down, apologizing for not being able to follow him properly. He said it was nothing, but she insisted that his flawless performance in infiltrating enemy territory and his skill in gathering information moved her deeply. She swore right then that she would follow him forever. Dion, confused, couldn't understand why this weirdo was suddenly saying all this in the middle of a mission. The only way to get her to stand back up was for him to pound his chest to declare he'd never betray her loyalty. Then he said it was time for them to go because the mortal knights had an investigation to conduct. Please don't bring that bunch of lunatics here. They'd end up slaughtering everyone. 3 days later, he was at the castle wondering why it was so hard to find a sorcerer in that region. Out of nearly 100 in the Empire, 99 were down south, while they were stuck in the north. He just hoped Cruel hadn't solved everything yet. Right then, Remember came in and said they had managed to find someone to remove that curse. Or better said, they had found a place where maybe they could get someone within a day. The scene shifted to him standing on a mountain, overlooking the city where some sorcerers supposedly lived. Lion told him to rest since they had rushed to get there, but Diem insisted they have to find someone quickly before that person arrived. And of course, Cruel was already walking up, making Dion wonder how that bastard had shown up again. Suddenly, a rock flew out of nowhere and hit the protagonist in the head. When he looked to the side, of course, Cruel was already standing in front, and it had been one of the villagers who threw it. Oona declared that disaster had arrived and that it was best to kill him. They had to drive this boy out of the village immediately. Lion instantly demanded to know how she dared speak to her lord that way. And Dion wasn't happy either, asking what this nonsense about disaster was supposed to mean. Lady really shouldn't have thrown that stone, because now he was shifting into his cursed mode, saying he believed he was nothing more than a simple sinner. But then he calmed down, thinking this woman must have lost her mind. But then at that moment, someone told the sorceress to calm down. That's when he realized she was the person he had been looking for. But suddenly, she grabbed his arms and told him he must not hate anything. He needed to know that he couldn't hate anyone or anything in that place, or else a terrible disaster would happen. He didn't understand a thing and pulled his hand away, wanting to know why she was getting so close. Right then, another woman put a hand on his shoulder and asked her grandmother to calm down. Finally, a woman appeared. Hopefully not another fake. The old lady kept warning her to be careful about the disaster, but the granddaughter said it was fine, nothing would happen. You couldn't judge people without even knowing who they were. Then someone said they had been waiting for him. She introduced herself as Ran and apologized to our boy. He said it was fine, and immediately she asked if he was there to find a sorcerer. He had no idea how she knew, but she explained it was simple for a sorceress like her. The moment he thought about doing it, they already knew he was coming. Was it because of the Church of Salvation? My God, maybe the spells really did work, or maybe she was working for that guy too, since everyone seemed to be tangled up in this. Now, Diem was worried because if he didn't accept this woman's help, that shady Cruel would end up getting involved with her instead. So right away, he grabbed her hand and thanked her for anything she could do for him. Meanwhile, Cruel, watching them leave, thought to himself that he didn't care how he got a sorcerer. Even if the Duke had told him to prove his worth, he knew that man wanted his victory above all else. So sooner or later, he'd have a sorcerer too. He wanted to speak with the old woman, but before he could say anything, the strange woman appeared and suddenly hugged him, saying she had seen him there as well. Cruel didn't understand, but the woman told him she knew he had been through a lot, and that he didn't have to worry. No one there hated him. She knew that in this world there was no one left who loved him. But he had to be careful, because in this world, those without love had short lives. That was why he needed to stay alive and win. Win the battle of who could outlive the other. Even if he was the reason the apocalypse would begin, if he survived, then the apocalypse wouldn't happen. If he ever felt like he was about to die, or that he would rather die, he had to make sure he killed that boy first. But honestly, it felt like the villagers were reading the story themselves. They seemed to know everything. At that moment, he raised his sword to her neck, telling her he knew how to take care of himself and warning her not to come close. All the while, he thought to himself that he had decided long ago he wouldn't die before Dian. As for our boy, he asked Ran if she could also see the future. She said yes, she could even see his future at that very moment. He didn't quite understand how they knew he would arrive there, but she explained that it wasn't exactly the future. She simply knew that a certain boy with certain intentions would eventually come to that village. While the two of them were talking, a man nearby was watching them, wondering who they were. Ran explained that she had to be careful when speaking about someone's future. But what she could guarantee was that the hatred inside him was like a fire in the forest. It started small, but eventually it would grow huge and consume everything in its path. And that boy was explosive enough that eventually he would cause all of it. Couldn't it be that kid from the village? The one now introducing himself as Dan, asking to go with Dion, saying that if he was really going to face this disaster, he would need his help in the future. Dan then told them about the day he discovered his destiny. Suddenly, the madam was thrown against the wall, and everyone began asking if she wasn't actually a sorceress. The boy stood there confused, not knowing what was happening, while the woman said that he truly was a traitor who would end up serving that disaster. So his grandmother had predicted that he would help someone cursed, and from that day on, everyone in the village started hating him, calling him disgusting. But Dan couldn't understand what they were even talking about. Ran was the only one telling everyone to stop, and that was the only reason he managed to survive. What he couldn't wrap his head around was how people who had once been his friends and neighbors suddenly turned on him. So he decided, if he was going to be hated by everyone because of this, then when that so-called disaster appeared, he would accept it. And after waiting for a long time, finally that person showed up. The second he saw him, he was sure he had found the disaster. Do I really understand where this is going? Not exactly, but I figure we'll find out soon enough because the protagonist was already back at home and Dan was there with him. Lane explained that this was someone he had brought from the village. Dan said he hadn't received much education, wasn't an exceptional fighter, but he wouldn't let his master down. The protagonist wondered if he should just send this guy away, but in the end he only said they'd talk about it later. For now, his priority was another mission. He explained that everything was ready, the knights needed to gather, it was time to move. Dan asked if he could go along, but the boy told him no, for now it was better if he stayed at the house. Milo, scowling, said fine, but he clearly wasn't happy about it. And the protagonist kept wondering why this shady guy wanted so badly to follow him. Not knowing his intentions, he found it extremely suspicious. So why bring him along in the first place? Oh right, because that girl, the one who saw the future, must have pointed him out. Later that night, at the Church of Salvation, the fire had already started and our boy's army went in with it. He had warned them beforehand. The plan was to set fire to everything and use the chaos as a chance to infiltrate. And he gave the order, if you see someone suspicious, kill him. See, even when he's not in curse mode, the protagonist isn't exactly kind-hearted. He kills without hesitation. Actually, no, he did show some restraint. He told them not to use the drug that made people lose control and also not to kill any believers. The knights thought it would have been easier to just cut everyone down, while some whispered that it was strange. The captain was usually brutal, and now he was acting soft. But then Ran appeared, saying she was the one who had asked for that. There was no need to spill so much blood yet. The soldiers were even more curious, wondering when that moment would come. She said they would find out soon, and that was enough to get them excited, saying she could count on them. Inside the church, everything was being destroyed, people were fleeing, and anyone who tried to defend it lay dead on the floor. And of course, as always, everyone recognized the white uniforms. Little Thea grabbed one of them and demanded to know why they were doing this, telling them to leave. She knew they had come to destroy the place and kill her too. She pleaded with them to go somewhere else because this was the only place she had. But the knight was already drawing his sword, saying you have to make an example of her. Paul, the boy from the slums, shouted for her to get away from him. The soldier swung, but suddenly his sword dropped to the ground. I thought someone had stopped him, but no. He had come to his senses. Without the drugs, they couldn't act like complete lunatics. In the end, he knew this place was the last hope for those people, and they would rather die than see it collapse. But outside, those who escaped knew that the one behind all this was the Emperor's sword, Dion Hart. And now they swore they would never forgive the Emperor for taking away the paradise they had. Inside the prayer room, Rand was studying the crystal, saying that the special energy inside it was different. It was something meant for communication and space distortion. Then suddenly, a magic circle appeared, and she jumped back in shock, realizing it wasn't just a spell, it was powerful magic disguised as one. That was because magic was supposed to be something only demons could use. Right away, Dion pointed out that it was impossible since they were in human territory. But Rand said she had suspected something from the first glance, and she was certain it could only be activated through magic. That immediately made Dion wonder if the Demon King knew about this. She asked for more time, saying she'd try to understand the structure and maybe eventually open it. The protagonist doubted that a sorceress could figure out something so complex. This kind of spell was far beyond ordinary magic. The only way would be if she were extremely skilled, which, judging from the fact that she did open it, she clearly was. He'd seen that same reaction before with a green-haired woman, so she wasn't normal either. Once the path opened, Dion said it was time to enter. But as soon as the three of them stepped inside, it seemed like they were still in the same place. Rand explained that it wasn't the same. There was clearly a magic circle there, covered in sigils, protecting a door on the other side. At least the door opened, and they came out into a forest. Lion was confused, and Rand explained that it was probably some kind of spatial connection. The spell above must link that door to another location, which meant the moment they passed through the crystal, they ended up inside this church that was actually somewhere else. Dion asked if she knew what kind of spell it was, but she admitted she had no idea how it really worked. The problem was the door could lead to different places, and they'd have to solve the spell properly to avoid stepping out into the wrong forest. It was confusing, but she said she needed 10 minutes to figure out the right path. Dion just hoped he wouldn't run into Cruel again while pacing around, wondering if there was anything he could do. Lion noticed he seemed restless and suddenly pulled out a ladder, telling him to rest there. But strangely enough, that was when she realized he had disappeared. She started calling for him, while the protagonist found himself face to face with Cruel in a corridor. Meanwhile, outside, the entire church was in flames. Salen, sitting on the outside, noticed civilians being evacuated, and she knew it wouldn't be long before they discovered who was behind it. To her, this was a poor strategy. If it were up to her, she'd seal everyone inside and kill them all. But now that Dion was involved, the priority was to get the evidence far away. The boy needed to learn who was really behind everything to take down the organization. And she was determined to make sure he never got what he wanted. Strangely, she was carrying papers away, while Cruel was right there with a torch, about to burn others. As soon as Dion remarked that they always met the worst times, Cruel dropped the torch. Of course, everything caught fire. The protagonist demanded to know what he was doing and tried to stop him, but his brother grabbed his wrist. He asked Cruel if he was an idiot, pointing out that he had the mission too, and there was evidence here. The problem was, now that Diem was in his calmer state, he didn't have the ruthlessness to just cut down his brother. Instead, Cruel shoved him into his arms, practically laying him down, and walked away. The protagonist, furious, wanted to lose it completely and tear him apart. While hitting his own chest in frustration, he wondered who could be behind the entire church. There weren't many in the Empire capable of orchestrating something so big. Then he asked himself who the most powerful among the royals was, the one with the purple crest, and the same person Cruel worked for. Obviously, it was that damn Stave Luster. His expression shifted instantly, realizing those bastards were playing him. He rammed his elbow into Cruel's face, but Cruel barely reacted. Instead, he tossed the boy into Lion's arms, and she immediately asked if he was alright. The protagonist burned with anger, but Cruel only said that if he wanted to keep on living, he better not speak a word about what he saw there today. And now our boy was lying in bed, covered in bandages. He kept thinking about that document Cruel had hidden in his shirt. Now that he knew Stave Luster was behind all of it, he realized that from the very beginning, he'd never had a real chance of winning. That was when Lane came into the room and told him Ran had already left. The protagonist felt a bit discouraged, but in his memory, Remember entered right after and said he had a visitor. This boy's life never stops for a second. The man gave his greetings to Count Dion Hart and said he was there to deliver a message from the Emperor. Unfortunately, since Dion hadn't won, now he would have to accept his punishment. The next chapter opened with Eduardo waking up in bed, startled. Ever since he ascended to the throne, he'd never been able to sleep peacefully. All the people he killed came to torment him at night, and the worst part was that now, even when he woke up, those souls were still staring at him, telling him they hated him, asking why he was the only one left alive after doing that to everyone. While he clawed at his own neck in torment, Elfidus entered and called for his uncle, saying that Dion Hart and Cruel had arrived. He asked if his uncle was all right, since he looked so pale, and guessed it must have been another nightmare. But the Emperor only snapped at him to get out. Elfidus noticed, though, that he wasn't looking directly at him. His eyes were fixed on something at the side. That was strange. He wanted to know if his uncle was hallucinating or something like that. Eduardo answered that it didn't affect his daily life. Elfidus wanted to call a doctor, but the Emperor told him to relax. It was just stress from preparing for war. He had no intention of shaking it off. If anything, no one needed to know, but he actually enjoyed seeing these visions. He told the boy not to worry. It wasn't a big deal. Strangely, Elfidus wanted to know how long his uncle planned to carry this guilt. After all, he had already made restitution to all the families of the victims, and he cared so much that he knew every one of their names by heart. My God, did the Emperor pull an Itachi? Was he the one who killed everyone because it was necessary? The Emperor said that in the end, it wasn't normal at all. Those people would still be alive if not for him. Then he added that the 8-year war had been his decision, so the blood of everyone, both allies and enemies, was on his hands. That was a weight he would carry as long as he was Emperor. But he didn't care because he had too much to do to let something like that defeat him. The scene shifted back to our protagonist, staring at Cruel, who as always was staring right back. The two glared at each other with pure hatred, until the Emperor appeared and welcomed them both. They bowed in respect, but the protagonist thought it was strange. The Emperor seemed irritated, considering that the mission had been accomplished. Eduardo told them to raise their heads and said he had heard they completed everything, but he also heard that Count Dion Hart had been a little too merciful. Why had he spared so many of the people directly involved? On the other hand, he was also the only one who had mobilized troops to capture people. Still, in the end, it was Cruel who brought back the evidence that revealed who was behind it all. Both had done good work, but it was Cruel who would be granted the wish, since his role was crucial. The protagonist already knew this, and Cruel gave his thanks. The Emperor told him to make his request, and right away he asked for our boy's county, saying that he knew Dion currently held it as an honorary possession. I swear, this brother is pulling Itachi. The Emperor remarked that it was a surprise, but asked if Dion would be willing to accept it. Of course, the protagonist was dying to say no way. He'd rather die than hand it over. But instead he said that honestly, it had only become another job for him. So if someone could take it off his hands, that would be perfect. The Emperor then said that was fine, but to hold a place like that, one needed a title. The Hart House, which Dion was tied to, already existed, so Cruel couldn't receive the same title. He would need either a new surname or a new title. So what would he prefer? Apparently, Cruel had lost his title as part of the Hart family when our boy took control of everything. The Emperor even offered to let him change his name, removing the heart at the end, but Cruel wanted to keep it as a reminder of his vengeance. His plan was to destroy the family with his own hands. Ah, so that was it. There couldn't be two honorary counts within the same family. The protagonist, however, thought this would actually be the best choice for him. Cruel, though, said he wasn't interested in changing his surname, nor did he care about inheriting anything from the Hart House. Dion found it odd because unlike being an honorary noble, carrying the Hart name meant carrying a long history. At that moment, the two of them were the only descendants left, yet the position of true leader wasn't filled. Dion thought it was him, but then remembered, no, he was only honorary. So he wondered if Cruel was refusing because he wanted to end the family bloodline. But that didn't make sense either, since Cruel didn't want to change his surname. The Emperor replied that he himself had made the same choice. They really were like siblings. The Emperor then suggested giving that region to Duke Aluster instead, That way, Cruel wouldn't need a title, but he would still be able to govern, since the Duke would leave him in charge. Cruel accepted, and the Emperor dismissed him, but told Dion to remain. There were things they needed to discuss. The protagonist braced himself, knowing something was about to fall on his shoulders. With only the two of them left, the air was heavy. Dion thought he was about to be punished, while the Emperor noticed he seemed tense, maybe because he had just lost that territory. He wished the boy would speak more openly instead of holding everything in. Then the Emperor revealed that soon another war would begin. The Church of Salvation had been destroyed at the perfect time, and now it was time to deal with the kingdom of Irian, which had been a thorn in their side for a while. Dion asked if he really intended to start a war with those people, and the Emperor said this was only the first step. But even Dion's calmer self had no desire for another war. He was already worn down after spending 8 years in the last one. Still, the king said Dion would be given the role of handling the demon kingdom. The Emperor wasn't going to sit back while he conquered the entire continent, so Dion's mission was to stay by that man's side and make sure he didn't interfere in the war. Better that than charging into battle and bathing in blood every day. The Emperor thanked him, touched the mark, and told him that the next time they met, that mark had better be gone. Dion only answered that he would try, all while wondering why this man wanted the mark gone when he wasn't going to let him retire anyway. At least he would be sent back to the demons, where those two seemed to truly like him, unlike the strange Aletia. The scene shifted to Cruel, who informed Stave Illuster that he had received the Heart County as his reward. The Count immediately recalled that the last time he spoke with Dion, a boy had mentioned wanting to give that place back. Now he wanted to know if Cruel had taken it as a reward because of his brother. Cruel answered no, he simply hadn't had many other desires. Stave didn't seem fully convinced. He apologized, saying maybe Cruel was stressed about the meeting he was about to have. Cruel brushed it off, saying everything was fine. After all, he was responsible for what he received as a reward. Stave congratulated him for the hard work he had been doing. But could there be something else he needed to know? Cruel said no, because he was hiding the fact that the protagonist had discovered the whole truth, that Stave was behind everything. Even though they tried to keep the boy out of it, Dion had found out anyway. Now the problem was that things would get complicated if Stave ever learned he had let Dion discover it. As the man left the room, he told Cruel to hurry up or they'd be late. Cruel stayed behind, thinking he had to make sure Stave never found out that Dion knew everything. And yet he kept staring at our boy's shadow. Strangely enough, he was acting that way because he was afraid Stave would kill Dion. I thought the danger was supposed to be Dion himself. Outside, he praised Salen for her work with the church. She thanked him and told him not to worry. They still had plenty of believers, and soon they would achieve what he wanted. That was when the real goal of those bastards became clear. Well, in truth, it was a pretty simple one. As they handed out bread and water, she would casually mention that their sponsor was Duke Illuster. That way he started being seen as a kind of messiah who was saving the poor, while more and more people grew to hate the emperor. The plan was for all the church's followers to see the emperor as the one who abandoned them, while the duke was portrayed as the savior of all. To be fair, the emperor wasn't even trying to protect his own image, so this mission was practically effortless. Steve said she would keep working hard. Then the scene shifted to a meeting where everyone wanted to know why they had been summoned so suddenly. Watching them argue, Stave thought they were all a bunch of fools. They should have known that if they'd all been called together, it had to be about one thing, the greatest strength of the current emperor. Another war was on its way. So yes, they had been summoned by the emperor himself. I thought it might have been some secret gathering, but no, it was an official call from him. As soon as he entered, everyone stood and saluted. Glory to the empire. He ordered them to sit, saying he knew they were busy, so to get straight to the point. From that day forward, they would declare war. Naturally, the nobles were in a panic, saying it had only been 2 years since they'd returned from an 8-year war. He told them that war had only ended because no one was challenging their authority anymore. But now, it seemed their enemies had forgotten their place in just 2 years. One advisor agreed that Irian had been disrespectful, but argued they couldn't just start another war over that. There had to be other ways to resolve things. The emperor, however, said it wasn't just Irian. There were more who weren't taking their strength seriously. Elsewhere, men in turbans were discussing Count Dion Hart, saying he was injured. The so-called vampire count might be out of the fight. A man in a blue turban declared that if the demon was hurt, it was time to bring down the empire. Hard times created heroes, and after an endless war of 8 years, only 3 had survived. Obviously, the most famous was the protagonist. The emperor remarked that the boy's very existence was enough to crush the spirit of their enemies. But Dion Hart's name wasn't the only thing the empire carried. It was time to remind the continent of that. From the start, the goal had been to dominate the entire region, and now it was time to return to that plan. The nobles hesitated, saying it was still too early. They had to deal with the revolutionary army, and it would be far too risky to pull troops from the capital at that moment. The emperor told them that was exactly why they had been brought there. He was looking for a solution to that very problem. When they tried to argue, he slammed his cup down and reminded them they were forgetting something. He was the empire, and he decided what happened. Any refusal from that point on would be seen as a direct insult to him. Instantly, the whole room fell silent, and then he declared that the war was confirmed. They needed to bring a real solution for dealing with the revolutionary army to the next meeting. Easy for him, right? Just declare war and throw it all on everyone else to fix. I'd be against that mess too. Now the nobles are leaving, muttering that this was only a matter of time. That war addict was bound to pull something like this eventually. The emperor then calls for Duke Leicester and points out that the person running the Salvation Church was someone who constantly met with him. The Duke apologizes, saying it was his fault for not managing his people properly. But right then, the emperor puts a sword to his throat and asks if he really thinks he's an idiot. This is the same emperor who killed 8 brothers already, and now he wants to know if the Duke honestly believes he's merciful. Leicester quickly says no, but the emperor continues, saying he's heard something interesting, something about being a sinner, and the great Duke Leicester being salvation itself. The Duke tries to brush it off, saying that must be the rambling of crazy, ignorant people. The emperor nods, agreeing that he's far more of a disaster than a sin. At that, Leicester tells him to stop, insisting that his majesty can't kill him. Eduardo answers that maybe he's forgotten. He's the last duke left in the region. Leicester says even so, he knows he can't be killed because if another noble dies at his blade, the rest will refuse to back this new war. The emperor laughs, pulls his sword away, and says those people calling him a sinner are wrong. Meanwhile, Leicester is already running through the hall, thinking that if he wants to strip the emperor of power, first he needs to deal with the one protecting him. It was time to make a move. Then we cut to the protagonist talking with Elphidus, who asks if he's heading to the Demon Kingdom. Dion doesn't even know himself, but how the hell does Elphidus? He tells him not to get so tense. He talks to the emperor every day, so of course he knows most of the secrets. Then he mentions that Dion must also know the emperor is itching to start the next war. The order is clear. If the Demon King decides to launch a war against them, Dion has to return immediately to help defend. That's the final rule, no matter what. Dion, cold as ever, says he'll keep it in mind. Elphidus stands, thanking him for his hard work. Damn, this guy trying to order our boy around like that. Didn't even use the sister to butter him up this time. Alone in the corridor, Elphidus is uneasy. The guy isn't just insanely strong in the human world, he's also one of the demon commanders. He has no idea what the emperor is planning, but he knows he has to keep in mind that Dion could betray them at any moment. That's why he tries to keep things friendly, though his own personality makes it anything but easy. Then the most honest girl in the whole story asks how the meeting with Dion went. He tells her it was nothing important, she didn't even need to be there. Instead, she should focus on becoming crown princess. She complains that it's boring, she doesn't want it, but he tells her to wake up. As second in line to the throne, she has responsibilities. Elitia says he looks too anxious and stressed, probably from all this talk about another war and the revolutionary army. Suddenly, she grabs his hand and drags him off for tea, saying he needs to relax once in a while. That's when Elphidus lets slip that their uncle's been having hallucinations, visions of the people he killed, tormenting him even now. And strangely enough, Elphidus admits that even if it's wrong to him, Eduardo is precious. He wouldn't mind standing against the whole world for that man. He says no doctor can figure out what the illness is, and she answers that it's obvious, it's guilt. In the middle of the flames, the emperor turns and declares he'll take responsibility. Right then, Eduardo says Elitia needs to understand they don't have time. The moment he found out about the hallucinations, he began preparing to take over the emperor's role, and those preparations are almost complete. He'll do his best in the meantime if she should focus on her studies. Damn, so basically he just said he wants to protect the emperor, but looks like he's also aiming to take his place, while saying that back when they were saved, they were still young. And being young in that palace was practically a sin, probably because, well, everyone else had been slaughtered. Meanwhile, Dion's at home, wondering how much the prince knows. And what was the emperor's true intention in making that kid deliver the message? Danny, who honestly, no one even knows why he's still in this story, sticks by his side, questioning why the boy looks so stressed after meeting with the emperor. The protagonist then asks if he has something to say since he's been standing there the whole time. Danny says yes, he wants to start making money. Not out of greed or anything like that, and he's even willing to hand over all the profits to the protagonist. Dion steps closer and says that from the moment he first saw him, he's been wondering what his intentions were. Nobody follows a stranger without a reason, and now suddenly he's talking about making money just to hand it all over. Either his goal is to build false trust, or he actually wants to serve him. But Dion doesn't really care either way. He just hands him a piece of paper and tells him to follow it, and eventually he'll make money. Whatever it is he's trying to do, he better not get in the way. Alright then, looks like our boy's already on the move again, heading back to the demon realm. But the whole troop shows up, insisting he can't just leave without saying goodbye. Remember apologizes, he tried to prevent it, but word got out. Still, Dion pulls up his hood, tosses it, and rides off on horseback, waving farewell to everyone. One of them tries to follow, but Remember yanks him off his course. They all trip over each other, collapse, and get left behind. Lion apologizes for letting him slip away, while everyone else prays he somehow survives again. As always though, Remember notices someone from the Revolutionary Army lurking out of nowhere, and look at that, he's grinning. Damn, I'm telling you, is this guy the one pulling all the strings? What a cursed life for our boy, can't trust a single soul in this place. At least in the demon realm, folks seem more straightforward. Now he's heading back only to walk straight into an ambush from those bastards who will obviously all get cut down and tortured. The next chapter opens at the Revolutionary Army's base. Seems one of them asks why they're only going to act after the Emperor's taken half the continent. Stave answers that this is the plan, but the captain of the revolutionaries, a man named Daniel, says he needs to understand why. Stave explains it's because the war needs to reach its peak, when the Emperor can't bring it to an end anymore and only prolong it. That's the moment they'll strike. By then, he'll have to split his forces and fight on countless fronts, including the Imperial Palace, and all defenses will be spread thin. Daniel says he understands. That's obvious, right? When defenses are weak, it's easier to kill everyone. Stave praises him for the sharp conclusion, calling him a genius. That's when someone bursts in, announcing that Dion Hart had suddenly left. Daniel celebrates, and Stave says it's a huge opportunity. You never know what to expect from that madman. The captain thanks Stave for the support and says he'll put someone on Dion to monitor what's going on. He immediately leaves to handle it, while Stave just sits there, smiling. It's more than obvious that any soldier sent to hunt down Dion Hart would just end up dead. And yeah, that's exactly what happened. The first one was already cut down. Not even by our boy, but by another squad that was guarding him. Then that squad also got wiped out. Looks like they were following the Majesty's orders, but even they didn't make it. And now Cruel is tailing the ones who are tailing the ones who are tailing our protagonist, which means Stave and the Revolutionary Army are kind of working against each other too. They just don't realize it yet. His plan is to cut off the Emperor's information about Dion. That way, the Emperor gets more anxious and might start making bad decisions in the war. On the other side, Cruel's mission is to find out where his brother is heading. I really thought they knew by now that our boy was friendly with the demons, but apparently not. The scene then shifts to the church, where everyone's abandoned and Thea is crying in front. Paul blames himself, saying he never should have brought her to this so-called place of salvation. Even though they were starving, they should have been more careful, especially because all it did was give them false hope that got ripped away. He tells her he's going to join the Revolutionary Army. He wants revenge against the Emperor who took away all the happiness they had. He reaches out his hand, asking if she wants to join him. But unlike last time when she agreed, now she just sits there quietly. He says fine, then he'll handle it alone if she wants to stay there abandoned. He looks back and remembers. You can make friends, but you can't get too close. He should have stuck to that rule, because then he wouldn't have gotten so close to Thea. Now he's crying, saying it's too late, he can't just turn his back on her. Meanwhile, over in the most peaceful place of this whole story, the Demon King's castle. The one girl who loves him honestly, Lilynell, is missing him, wondering when the commander will return. Someone beside her asks how much longer they're going to just sit there waiting. But then Lilynell suddenly flies off on her broom, saying she feels a strange presence approaching. She heads to the gate and lights up when she sees him arriving, giving him that stare. She bursts in front of him, all bubbly, saying she missed him and wants to know how the mission went. He just lets out a ha, but inside he's startled by her popping out of nowhere like that. He answers that it was tiring, but he wrapped up some weird religion business and other stuff. Lilynell doesn't even know what the word religion means. He explains it's like a group of people following another person, just like they follow the Demon King with all their heart. She says that's stupid. You shouldn't have to blindly follow someone like that. And besides, they'd be better off following Dion instead of anyone else. Just like in the demon church, he asks what she's talking about. She brushes it off, says it's nothing, and asks if he's not going to speak with the Demon King. Right then, the king is in the central garden. And from the way things look, there might be folks who actually worship Dion, which of course makes sense. This demon realm is full of lunatics, but at least their devotion feels honest. In the middle of the garden, there's a meeting with the Queen of Mermaids, the Fairy King, the Vampire Queen, and the Dwarf King. And they all already know the Demon King is preparing to start a war with the Aryan Empire. This part of the continent, known as the Abyss, isn't just home to demons, but to all these other races too. The Demon King comments that he didn't think they were so interested in humans. The Fairy King answers that of course they have to be careful. The moment the Empire conquers the rest of the continent, they'll be the next target. And since humans and demons are always at war, he doesn't expect the other races to stay untouched by all of this. The king replies that he's pretty bold to say something like that. But the timing couldn't be better, since his informant from the human realm has just arrived, Captain Demon Arut. Only this kid, right? Wandering around with the Emperor one moment, then coming to talk with the Demon King the next. He's practically living in every corner of the world. The Demon King is already all hyped, wanting to know if he had a good trip, marking that spot on his chest, saying they've got plenty to discuss. Before the kid can even get a single word out, he already wants to know if it's true that the Emperor plans to conquer the rest of the continent. Dion is about to say yes when suddenly the elf cuts in, saying he's heard about this so-called informant. But really, would anyone at that table trust a human? I also think it's suspicious how easily everyone puts their trust in him. But we know the Demon King always has some card up his sleeve. He assures them they don't need to worry. While he's around, everyone can trust Dion. But Dion himself realizes it. If he ever turns his back, he's definitely going to become everyone's target in that room. The king then asks what orders he received from the Emperor. Dion hesitates for a second about saying it in front of everyone, but since the king asked, he speaks. The Emperor's order was simple. The moment the Demon King started to get involved in the war, Dion was supposed to interfere with everything. And if the Demon King actually went all in on the war, Dion was to return to the humans and help defend them. Our protagonist throws out the info straight up, no hiding, no psychological games. He just says it, and because of that, no one suspects a thing. The Demon King responds that he already figured as much. That's the obvious move. Then Demon adds that he found some magic in the human realm. He was investigating a religious group called the Church of Salvation, and one of the seals they were using had strange magic woven into it. The Demon King thanks him and tells him to rest for now. But Dian notices, this should have been the kind of news that would shake the Demon King. Instead, he didn't even look curious or angry, which was odd. At that moment, the doctor shows up by his side, startling him. Dian coughs up the usual blood, and the doctor immediately says he'll take care of him and leads him away. The Demon King, though, just keeps staring. Meanwhile, the Elf King asks why he's not going to investigate it. Who was the demon bold enough to use magic in the human realm without him knowing? Then he outright accuses the Demon King of having ordered it himself, but the Demon King tells him to shut his mouth and watch what he says. The blonde elf slams the table and warns him to be careful, that his race is sensitive to shifts in the world. He can feel it soon a hero will be sent, someone unlike anyone before, a threat to the whole region. But the Demon King simply says he has no fear of that. When the time comes to face this hero, he'll deal with it. Besides, he's been bored, and it's about time something interesting happens after all this quiet. The Elf King says fine, since it's his chest that might end up with a sword stuck in it. With that, all four rulers start leaving the beautiful vampire queen slipping out without a single word. They're all hesitating, realizing they can't rely on the Demon King and thinking about having a private discussion amongst themselves. Suddenly, the Demon King asks why they're showing no respect. He won't accept that kind of insolence from a runaway Elf King. Everyone there is practically collapsing, gasping for breath, but then he says he'll let it slide because they're just a bunch of children. This time he'll allow them to leave, but the Elf King had better watch what he's thinking. Meanwhile, the protagonist is walking down the corridor. The doctor wants to help, but he tells him to quit bothering him. He remembers that ever since the kid arrived, he's always been like this. He's always coughing up blood. The Demon King is always ordering people to help him, but the boy never accepts any real treatment. Somehow, the healer always fails in his duty to take care of the after effects of that battle with the hero, but Dian just tells him not to worry, he won't die. He didn't do anything wrong, so the healer can go back to looking after other tasks. Strangely enough, since he never accepts treatment, Ben swore he'd eventually find a cure for his condition. Once again, he asks the boy to let him do a checkup. The protagonist flinches when he comes close, but Ben shows him a magic stone that combines his blood with the Demon King's. He explains that if the boy feels anything, he just needs to say it, and the stone will speed up his blood flow and help him recover much faster. But it only works, unfortunately, while he's inside the demon realm and close to the king's power. The protagonist says it's not necessary, but right then he runs into Ed. I'm telling you, this kid doesn't get a moment of rest. Ed's there looking him over from every angle, saying he's going to scold Ben for not taking proper care of him. That's when Heen also shows up, saying he wants to talk to the boy in private. Luckily, Ed steps in, pulls him back, and says to let him rest. What the hell? He literally slammed the femboy against the wall, telling him not to speak so casually with the commander. Poor guy apologized, saying he'd already met Dion once before and even showed him the garden. And now they brought a little gift, this cute, energetic plant. Of course, Ed flat out said there's no way he wants that monstrosity. Heen just asks him to show it, and he reluctantly agrees and sends him away. That's when we see Dion, a little earlier, telling Ed not to kill him since he didn't do anything wrong. Because of that, Ed kind of accepted it, grabbed the plant, and went to deliver it to the boy. Now Dion's lying there in bed, staring at this creepy thing, screaming like a weirdo, humming a little tune right in front of him. But the creature is terrifying and he jumps back, saying this damn thing's gonna kill him. As he backs up, a knife stabs into the wall right next to his head, and he wonders if the plant attacked too. But then someone walks into the room saying he never disappoints. It's incredible how he could sense the presence of that dagger. I'm telling you, the demon realm is a way better fit for the kid. This one here is the commander of the 2nd Division, known as Villania. Acting all sly, she covers her mouth with her hand, asking how he dodged something thrown by a specialist in infiltration, invisibility, and assassination. Dion, though, is just thinking he didn't even get startled. He was more worried about the weird little plant than her. She keeps pressing, wanting to know how he noticed her at all, since it was a perfect attack. Then she asks if he could feel her hostility toward him. But obviously, she'd never have that much courage, since she knows at any moment he could snap and kill her. She asks him to relax a little and says she brought a pile of gifts for him. Apparently, it's a whole bunch of clothes, and she makes him try them all on right there. Don't ask me why either. Suddenly, some masked guy barges in, apologizing and saying he was knocking, but no one answered. He says he heard Dean had returned and came to pay his respects. Then he smacks his sword against the door like an idiot and collapses on the floor. Right after that, another one with green hair, not the assistant to the 8th Commander, comes to help him. The protagonist is just sitting there, completely lost, wondering what the hell is going on in his room, while Villania waves goodbye and heads out. But she stops at the door and tells Commander Hell that she heard some idiot in the first city has been saying things about the commander. Weirdly, the commander sinks to the floor and Nine tells her to quit treating him like that. The protagonist just wants these lunatics out of his room as soon as possible. The 8th commander, this guy called Hell, is someone who was born from the Demon King's own shadow. Originally, he was the guardian of the castle, but as their territory expanded, he ended up getting assigned a secret mission. His job was to prevent any demon from leaking information about what the protagonist looked like. Whether it was a demon casually mentioning him or even during the hero's battle, Hell was the one responsible for making sure no one knew Dian's appearance, or, in this case, the demon Arut. It wasn't by coincidence that nobody in the Empire up until now had the slightest idea what the commander looked like. So, Nine talks with Hell in one of the rooms, saying he's glad he managed to protect the information once again. He asks if he can try talking to Dian now, and Nine says yes, that for sure the boy will be grateful for everything he's been doing. The protagonist was finally starting to relax in his room with his little Q when the guy suddenly showed up staring him down. Dian gets startled and Hell says he was only there to pay his respects and update him on everything that's been going on. Because of the scare, the protagonist spit blood like always, and then Ben barged in, asking if he was feeling okay. The weird Hell was already about to take his own life, saying he had made the commander suffer, but the two told him to stop and not even think about it. Dian tells him to just go back to his usual work, while at the same time wondering why Hell was the only demon in the whole kingdom who looked at him so calmly, like he could kill him easily if he wanted to. Considering the guy was literally the Demon King's shadow, he was anything but weak. With that, Ben leaves and Dian is finally alone in the room for a second. He starts thinking that now he remembered what life was really like living in the Demon King's castle, and now that things are official, maybe he should start acting as a double agent, just like the Emperor wanted. And that right there was the beginning of the end for the Demon King, and of the like on this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers. Activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.